You've heard the name Lizzie Borden, haven't you? The name that echoes through the halls of history like a whisper of madness. But let me tell you, it's not just the story that haunts this place, it's the silence that follows it. This isn't just any old house. It's a place where time seems to pause, where the air feels heavy with secrets. The locals say it's not the ghosts that linger here, it's the weight of the past. You might think, how could a house built in the 1800s still hold so much pain? Well, let me tell you, the walls here don't just remember, they scream asterisk. And if you've ever wondered what it's like to be trapped in a place where the past won't let you go, then you'll want to hear this story. Because this house has a way of making you feel like you're not just a visitor, you're a witness. So, come along, dear listener. Let's step inside and see what secrets this house has been keeping for over a century. But be warned, once you hear the story, you might never hear the silence the same way again. You know, the Borden house wasn't always a place of screams and shadows. Back in 1870, it was a modest, white clapboard home, just like any other in Fall River, Massachusetts. It had a wraparound porch, a wide front door, and a family that loved to host guests for dinner. Lizzie Borden was the eldest daughter, and she had a bit of a temper, though not everyone would say it was justified. She was also very close to her father, a stern but loving man who ran the family's hardware business. But things changed in the summer of 1892. On August 4, 1892, the Borden family gathered for a picnic at a nearby lake. It was a peaceful day, the kind that makes you forget the storms brewing in people's hearts. That evening, when Lizzie returned home, she found her father dead in the kitchen, his head split open, his body slumped over the table. The police ruled it a murder, but the details were murky. Lizzie was the prime suspect, and her mother, Abby, was found dead in the woods just days later. The town was split. Some believed Lizzie did it, others thought she was framed, and some still believe the house itself knows the truth. Lizzie was tried, found guilty, and sentenced to life in prison. But she was never executed. She was released after serving 2 years. She spent the rest of her life in an asylum, haunted by the past. And the house? It has never been the same since. Now, decades later, the house stands as a museum, but some say it's still alive with the voices of the past. You can hear the echo of a scream, or feel the weight of a secret in the air. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, it sounds like someone is calling your name. You remember the day you first heard the whispers in the house, didn't you? That first time the wind howled like a ghost through the cracks, and the windows rattled as if someone were trying to get in. The house didn't just sit still, it breathed. And every time it did, it seemed to carry with it a memory of something old, something that didn't belong in the 21st century. You started to notice the things that weren't there before: a faint scent of lavender in the air, a sound like a child's laughter echoing through the halls when no one was around. It wasn't just the house, it was the people, too. The locals would speak in hushed tones about the Borden family, about the tragedy, about the way time never quite healed the wounds of that house. And then, of course, there was the music. You couldn't quite place it, but it was always there, soft, mournful, like a lullaby played by someone who had long since passed. You wondered then, as you do now, whether the house was trying to tell you something or if it was just waiting for someone to finally listen. You remember the day, don't you? The day the house became a prison for a woman who had already lost everything. And the day the world stopped listening. It was a Sunday in July, 1892. The sun was high, but the air was thick with the weight of a storm that hadn't come yet. And that's when the first scream echoed through the house. They say she screamed because she was mad. But I wonder, was it madness, or was it the sound of a soul being torn from its body? And then, the silence. A silence so thick, it swallowed the sound. A silence that would haunt the town for decades and the house for centuries. The world moved on, but the house held on. And now, the echoes of that scream still live in the walls, waiting for someone to hear them. I've spoken to dozens of people who claim to have heard that voice, but no one can agree on what it said. Some say it was a woman, others say it was a child, and a few insist it was a man. But they all agree on one thing: this voice is never silent. One woman told me she heard it in the middle of the night, right outside her window. She said it wasn't loud, just a whisper like someone was trying to get her attention. She didn't open the window. She didn't move. She just listened. A retired police officer told me he was there in the 1980s doing a routine investigation, and he heard it too. He said it was like a child was crying, but not in any way that made sense. He described it as a sound that felt like it was coming from inside the walls. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a young girl who said she saw a figure in the attic. She didn't say what it looked like, but she described it as being there, just standing, watching her. And when she ran away, it followed. It's hard to say if these voices are real or just the result of the house's long history. But one thing is certain: no one leaves Lizzie Borden house the same. Some say they hear it still, long after they've left. The investigators started with the old blueprints, tracing the walls like a child with a crayon. They were looking for the spots where the whispers had been loudest, where the air felt too still. They found a hidden panel behind the staircase, a seam in the floorboard that hadn't been noticed in decades. It opened to a small, dusty chamber untouched by time. In that room, they found a collection of old letters, all written in a shaky hand, addressed to Lizzie Borden. The words were full of fear, not anger, like someone was begging for help, not revenge. One letter even mentioned a sound, a cry, not a scream, coming from the attic at night. The writer was convinced they were hearing the same thing that had driven Lizzie to madness. The investigators also found a rusted key in the floorboards with no matching lock. It was the kind of thing you might find in a dream, something that doesn't belong in the waking world. You know, there's one thing about the Lizzie Borden house that still makes me wonder, why did the axe never get found? It's like the house itself decided to keep that secret. The police searched everywhere, but the axe just vanished. Some say it was taken by a neighbor, others say it was hidden by the house itself. But no one ever found it, not even the experts. There's something about that missing axe that still haunts the house. You can feel it in the air, like a secret that's never been told. And maybe that's why the house still screams. So, what do you think? Was it a coincidence, a cover-up, or something even deeper? The house has its own way of remembering, and some secrets, it seems, are better left in the shadows. You've heard the rumors, but let me tell you what the locals really whisper. Some say Lizzie's scream still echoes through the beams, a sound that never fades. Others insist the house itself is the source of the noise, a voice born from the walls. There's a tale about a local handyman who claimed he once heard the scream in the dead of night, but when he checked, there was no one home. He said it was like the house was trying to warn him, or maybe tell him something. There's also the theory that the scream was never real, that it was a trick of the mind, a story passed down for generations to keep the house in the public eye. But if that's true, then why does it still sound so real? And then there are the skeptics, the ones who say the house is just a collection of old wood and broken windows. But even they can't deny that something about this place feels alive, like it's waiting for someone to listen. You know, sometimes the real horror isn't the ghost, but the questions that never get answered. What if the screams you hear aren't from the past, but from the people who still live with the weight of what happened? The case was never closed, not really. People still argue over the truth, over whether the axe was the weapon, or if the story was just a cover for something darker. And that's what makes it so haunting. No one can ever be sure. There's something about the unanswered that lingers longer than the dead. Maybe that's why the house still whispers, why the trees still rustle like they're trying to tell a secret. Maybe the real scream is the silence that follows. And so we return to the question, was it a crime of passion, a crime of madness, or something else entirely? The truth, like the ghost, remains just out of reach. But maybe that's the real horror, not the scream, but the silence that comes after. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You've heard the whispers, felt the chill, and now you're left with the question that lingers like a ghost in the dark. What if the house isn't just haunted, but remembering? It's easy to think of Lizzie Borden as a tragic figure, but what if she's not the only one trapped in that house's memory? What if the walls are still holding on to something else? And as you turn the corner, you might just hear it again, just a whisper, just a scream, just a question that lingers in the air like the scent of old wood and rusted nails. So, before we move on, I want you to think, what's the one thing that haunts you most? Not because it's scary, but because it's real. And remember, the stories we tell are not just about the past, they're about the echoes that still live in the present. You've heard of the Asylum of St. Remy, haven't you? A place where the walls don't just echo, they scream. It's in the south of France, nestled in the hills of St. Remy-Provence, where the sun sets like a slow, burning breath. It was built in the 1800s, a time when madness was a crime, and the sick were locked away in silence. But the silence there was never silent. People say the walls are alive, and they don't just whisper, they howl. There are stories of patients who vanished, of doctors who disappeared, of voices that rise at night. Some say the screams come from the walls themselves, trapped in the stone, begging for release. But what if the screams are just the echo of a past that refuses to die? What if the walls are not just remembering but warning us? I wonder, have you ever heard a silence so loud it speaks? You know, Saint-Rémy wasn't always a place of screams and shadows. It started as a humble French village, nestled in the hills of Provence, where the air smelled of lavender and the fields stretched endlessly under the sun. But in the 18th century, the village grew restless, and a new kind of institution was born, a place for those deemed unwell in a time when madness was often seen as a curse or a punishment. But the walls, you see, were never just stone. They were built by men who had once been patients themselves, and they carried the weight of their own haunted pasts. And so, as the years passed, the asylum became more than a place of treatment. It became a place where the line between healer and patient blurred, and the whispers of the lost grew louder than the voices of the living. The history is as deep as the earth beneath these stones, and the mystery of Saint-Rémy is only beginning to be uncovered. But the walls, they have their own story to tell. You know how sometimes a house just feels off? Not broken, not haunted, but like it's holding its breath. That's how Saint-Rémy felt. A place where the air was thick with secrets and the silence was too loud. The first complaints came from the nurses' whispers of voices in the night, like someone was singing a lullaby that wasn't meant for this world. Not loud, just lingering, like smoke in the air. Then came the sounds. Not screams, not howls, but a low, mournful hum, like a child's lullaby being played on a broken piano. It would rise and fall like a heartbeat, and then vanish, leaving the staff in stunned silence. They tried to ignore it, of course. That's what you do when the walls start talking. But the hum grew louder, and the nurses began to dream of things they didn't remember, of patients who had never been there, and of doors that shouldn't exist. One morning, a nurse came in, pale as a ghost, and said, "The walls are screaming. But they're not screaming at us. They're screaming for help." And that's when the world started to listen. You know, the real horror of Saint-Rémy isn't just the ghosts, it's the silence that follows the screams. You ever wonder what happens to a voice when it's stolen away by the walls? There was a girl, just 16, who vanished without a sound. No ransom, no trace. Just a room left untouched, like the world had forgotten she ever existed. The nurses said she was too quiet a girl who didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't fight. They called her the Silent One. But the walls remember what they saw. And then, one night, the walls stopped screaming. No one ever found her. Just a room, a silence, and the echo of a voice that never came back. I've spoken to dozens of people who claim to have heard the walls of Saint-Rémy scream. Some say it was in the dead of night, others during the day, but they all agree the sound was unmistakable, like a child's cry echoing through stone. One woman told me she was walking through the gardens when she heard a sound like a woman sobbing, but when she turned, there was no one there. She said it felt like the earth itself was mourning. Another visitor described hearing a voice in French calling out for help, but when they followed the sound, it vanished like smoke. They said it felt like someone was trying to reach them across time. And then there was the man who said the walls didn't just scream, they wept. He described the sound like rain on stone, but it was warm, almost like tears falling from a living thing. We followed the trail of whispers through the crumbling corridors of Saint-Rémy, where the walls seemed to remember every scream. You've heard the stories, but now you're standing where the silence feels like a living thing. The investigators found notes, written in shaky hands, describing the patient's final moments, how they'd look up at the ceiling, eyes wide, and whisper names that no one knew. Some said they were calling out to their mothers. There were records of patients who vanished without a trace, their rooms left untouched, as if they'd simply disappeared into the walls. The staff never explained what happened to them, only that they were taken elsewhere. The most disturbing find was a locked room with no key, and inside, a child's bed, a toy, and a single, untouched crayon drawing. It was of a girl, standing beside a tall, shadowy figure, smiling. We left with more questions than answers, and a growing sense that Saint-Rémy was not just haunted, it was holding on to something that refused to let go. You know, there's one thing about Saint-Rémy that just doesn't add up. No one can explain why the walls still scream, even when no one's around to hear them. It's not the wind, not the echoes, not even the memories of the patients. It's something else. Something that no one ever heard, but somehow everyone feels. The staff and the researchers have tried everything. They've listened, they've recorded, they've waited, but nothing. Just silence. Except when the walls start to scream. And that's the real mystery. Not the screams, not the ghosts, not the patients. It's the silence that follows. The silence that no one can explain, even after all this time. You know, the locals still swear the walls here don't just echo, they scream. Some say it's the wind, others say it's the ghosts of the patients who never left. They tell stories of how the nurses used to hear the voices at night calling for help, or just screaming. Some say it's the voice of a young woman named Camille, who vanished in the 1890s. Others think the voices are just the patients who stayed too long, their minds and bodies breaking down until they were never truly there anymore. But the real mystery, you see, is why the walls scream only at certain times. Some say it's the full moon, others say it's the hour of the dead, and still others say it's just waiting for someone to listen. You know, sometimes the most haunting thing about a place isn't the ghosts, it's the questions that never get answered. What if St. Tremy's screams were never just the voices of the mad? There are whispers of a secret wing, hidden beneath the floorboards where the patients were taken. No one knows if it was a lab, a prison, or something far darker. The records were burned, the staff vanished, and the doctors left no name. Just a list of patients who never left, and a silence that echoes through every stone. And now, every so often, the walls still scream. Not in a way that can be explained, just a sound that lingers, like a memory too painful to forget. So, what do you think? Was it a cover-up? A cover-up of something else? Or was St. Tremy just one of many places where the truth was never meant to be found? You know, sometimes the most haunting stories are the ones that never quite end. Like a whisper in the dark, they linger just beyond reach, waiting for the right moment to slip back into your mind. And just like that, the walls of St. Tremy still echo with voices no one can hear, but some say they can feel. A gentle breeze carries the scent of old stone and fading memories. I wonder, if you were to walk those halls tonight, would you hear them? Or would you just feel the weight of something ancient pressing against your skin? The asylum may be silent now, but the echoes remain. And sometimes, the walls don't just scream, they just wait. You've heard of the Priory of Sion, haven't you? A place whispered about in the shadows of history, where secrets were buried deeper than the earth. But what if I told you the real story is far more chilling than the myths? Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. This wasn't just a monastery, it was a fortress of knowledge, a place where forbidden truths were kept hidden. But the deeper the secrets, the more the darkness clung to it. Local legends say the air here is thick with the weight of centuries, like the ghosts of scholars and scribes still trapped within these walls, their voices echoing through the silence. Some say the priory was cursed the moment its founders tried to hide the truth. Others believe it was a trap, a place where the line between reality and the supernatural was never meant to be crossed. But what really happened here? And why did the whispers still echo through the stone? That's the mystery we're about to uncover, one that might not be as easy to solve as you'd hope. You know, the Priory of Sion didn't start as a place of ghosts or secrets. It began as a humble religious order, a brotherhood of knights who took vows of poverty and chastity. But their story, like so many before them, was far more complex than they imagined. Founded in the 12th century, the priory was meant to protect the Holy Grail, that sacred chalice said to hold the last blood of Christ. The knights believed they were chosen to guard this relic, though many would later question if they were truly its protectors or its prisoners. The order had its own set of rules, its own language, and its own way of passing down secrets. But as the centuries passed, some of those secrets were lost, others were hidden, and a few, like the Grail itself, were never found. And so, the Priory of Sion became more than a religious order. It became a symbol of mystery, a place where the line between faith and fear, truth and legend, began to blur. And that, my dear friends, is where the real story begins. You know how sometimes the first whisper of trouble comes not with a scream, but with a silence? That's what happened here. The monks had been gone for months, and the chapel was still standing, but the air felt wrong. The first sign was a child's toy found in the cloister, perfectly preserved, as if time had paused just for it. The monks never mentioned it, but the nuns who came later say it wasn't meant to be there. Then came the cold. Not the kind that comes with winter, but a cold that clung to the skin, even in the height of summer. The monks had left behind a fire, but no one remembered lighting it. The local farmers started to say the wind carried whispers through the trees. They said the monks were not gone, but waiting, and that the place had a memory, one that still clung to the stones. You might think it's just old buildings, but there's something more here. Something that lingers, even when the people are gone. And it's not just the stones, it's the silence between them. You remember the moment, don't you? The silence before the storm, the kind that lingers in the air like a promise of something terrible about to unfold. It was the night of the solstice, and the air was thick with the scent of old parchment and something else, something that didn't belong. A presence, maybe, a warning. Inside, the air was colder than the outside, and the silence wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a presence, pressing against the ears, making the spine tingle. Then, the sound. A soft, almost musical hum, like a bell far off, but not quite. And then nothing, just stillness, and the feeling that something had been taken. They found the box later, empty. The parchment was gone, but the echo of that sound remained, lingering in the minds of those who heard it, like a ghost of a truth they were never meant to know. I remember the first time I heard about the Priory of Sion. A friend, a retired librarian, told me about these old manuscripts that kept appearing in the most unlikely places. She said they were never the same text, never the same handwriting. One man claimed he found a manuscript in his grandmother's attic. He said it was wrapped in a silk scarf, the ink bleeding like old blood, and the pages kept shifting when he tried to read them. He said the words moved. There's a man in France who says he was invited to a private exhibition of these manuscripts. He said the room was cold, the air thick with a scent like old parchment and something else, something metallic. He said the words on the pages seemed to hum. And then there was the priest who claimed he saw a vision of the priory's last abbot, a man in a tattered robe, whispering secrets in a language that wasn't quite Latin. He said the man vanished the moment he tried to speak. These accounts don't all agree, but they all point to something ancient, something hidden. And if you've ever wondered why these manuscripts keep turning up, maybe it's not a coincidence. Maybe they're calling. We followed the trail of whispers to a forgotten archive in Lyon, where dust clung to the edges of yellowed documents like memories waiting to be remembered. The files spoke of secret meetings, coded messages, and a map that led to a hidden chamber beneath the priory, though no one could agree on where it had ever been. As we dug deeper, the records grew more cryptic, references to a sacred key, a forgotten cipher, and a name that kept appearing, though no one could say who it belonged to. It was as if the past itself was trying to tell us something, but the words were written in a language we could never quite understand. And so, with every clue we uncovered, the mystery only deepened, like an old story that refuses to let go of its secrets. You know, there's one thing that has always bugged me about the Priory of Sion. No one seems to know exactly how the original manuscripts disappeared. It's like someone just vanished them, and no one noticed. It wasn't just the manuscripts. The whole thing feels staged, like someone wanted to erase the Priory from history, but not before leaving a trail of questions behind. And here's the kicker: the last known records of the Priory were destroyed in a fire, but no one knows who lit the match. It's like the whole thing was written in smoke and forgotten. So, if you're wondering what really happened to the Priory of Sion, I say this: maybe the truth is still out there, waiting for someone brave enough to look. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? That the Priory of Sion wasn't just a place, but a family of witches, brewing secrets in their cellars, passing down curses through generations. Some say the last of them died in the 18th century, but the bloodline still lives on. In the small town of La Roque, they tell of a woman who vanished in the 1940s, her husband found dead in the woods, and her baby never seen again. Some say the Priory's curse followed her, and she's been haunting the place ever since. There's even a theory that the Priory's power isn't in their blood, but in their knowledge. That they were guardians of something ancient, something that still lingers in the land, waiting for the right soul to awaken it. And then there are the children, the ones who say they hear voices in the night, or feel a chill when no one's around. They whisper that the Priory isn't done with them yet, and that the legacy is still waiting to be claimed. You know, some mysteries don't just fade away, they linger, like a shadow in the corner of your eye, waiting for the right moment to creep up and whisper, "What if it's not over?" The Priory of Sion may be buried under centuries of dust, but its secrets have found new life in the whispers of modern conspiracy, and the cold, hard truth remains: no one's ever solved it. Perhaps the real curse isn't the ghosts or the secrets, but the idea that some stories are never meant to be finished, that they're meant to haunt us forever. So, as we wrap up this tale, I'll leave you with this. What if the Priory of Sion is still watching? What if the mystery is only just beginning? You know, sometimes the most haunting stories aren't the ones that end in a scream, but the ones that linger in the silence between the lines. And as we close this chapter, I wonder what secrets still wait in the hush of the old stones, just beyond the reach of our understanding. The past is never truly gone, it just waits, patient and quiet, for the right moment to whisper its truth. So let's carry these stories with us, like a soft breeze through the curtains of our minds, never too loud, but never too far away. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another tale waiting in the shadows, something that's been waiting for you, just as long as it's been waiting for me. You've heard of the Mary Celeste, haven't you? The ghost ship that drifted into legend, half afloat on the Atlantic, with no crew, no cargo, and a ghostly captain who never made it home. She was a fine ship in her day, built for trade, not terror. But something about her last voyage turned her into a whisper in the dark, a question without an answer. You can't just walk up to her. She's not a place you visit, she's a ghost, a mystery that haunts the waves, waiting for someone to listen. So why do people still come looking for her? Maybe they're hoping she'll finally tell her story. Or maybe they just want to know what happened to that poor captain and his crew. quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And that's where we begin. Not with the story of the ship, but with the story of the man who sailed her and the silence that followed. So, the Mary Celeste was no ordinary ship. It was a 19th century steamship, built for the booming trade between New York and the Mediterranean. It was fast, reliable, and built to carry cargo, mostly alcohol and wine, you might say, for a time. But what really made it famous wasn't its speed or its cargo, it was its crew. The captain, Benjamin M. Briggs, was a man of quiet strength, and his first mate, Henry, was his right hand. The rest of the crew, they were just a few souls, all bound by the same fate. The first to disappear was the cook, then the quartermaster, then the boatswain. Each time, they just left. No notes, no warnings, just silence. And then, the final blow when the ship was found, empty, drifting in the Atlantic with no one aboard. No one knows what happened to the crew. Some say they were poisoned, others say they were scared off by something supernatural, and some say it was a simple case of madness. But the truth, still buried in the waves. You see it now, the Mary Celeste, a fine wooden ship sitting still in the middle of the ocean as though time had paused just to stare at her. Her sails are furled, her masts are straight, but her look is one of quiet despair. The first sign was the lack of crew. No one was on board, yet the ship was in perfect condition, as if the crew had simply vanished into the night, leaving behind their lives and their ship. The third sign was the cabin. The door was ajar, and inside, everything was left as if the last man had stepped out and never returned. The air felt different, heavier, as though it had been waiting for someone to notice. The fourth sign was the wine. A bottle of wine was left uncorked on the table, as though someone had poured a glass and then stepped away, never to return. It sat there, untouched, in the quiet of a ship that no longer belonged to anyone. And the fifth sign? That's the one that made them look twice. The ship was in the middle of the ocean, far from land, but the sea was too calm, the sky too still. It was as if the ship had been waiting for someone to come and find it. One morning, the crew awoke to find the Mary Celeste eerily quiet, her sails furled, her decks eerily still. The ship had drifted into the Atlantic, like a ghost caught in time, waiting for someone to wake her. Inside the cabin, the crew found the barrels of water untouched, the food still sealed, the crew's belongings neatly packed, no sign of struggle, no blood, just the silence of a vanished people. The ship had simply vanished, leaving behind only the ghost of a crew, a bottle of brandy, and the weight of a mystery that would haunt the sea for generations. No one ever found the crew, but the ship, she was found again, years later, drifting aimlessly, her name etched into the history of the sea like a whisper in the dark. You remember the sailor who claimed he saw a ghostly ship in the fog? He said it was the Mary Celeste, all white and silent, like a mirage. He swore he heard a woman's voice calling from the dark. Another man said he saw a woman in a white dress standing at the bow, her face turned toward the shore. She didn't move, just stared, as if waiting for someone who wasn't there. A sailor once said he saw a figure on the deck, not a ghost, but a man in a coat, waving his arms like he was trying to get someone's attention. He vanished before the ship could be seen again. And then there was the woman who said she saw the ship in a dream, just before she died. She said it was waiting for her, like it had been waiting for a long time. These stories don't prove the Mary Celeste is haunted, but they remind us that some mysteries are too deep for logic and too heavy for the heart. The investigation began in the late 1800s with a ship captain named David Morton taking charge. He was a man of quiet determination, always watching the horizon with a kind of weary hope. He asked the crew of the Dane to help, but they were all too scared to talk. Some said they saw the ghost of a woman in a crow's nest. Others claimed they heard a child's laughter in the night. They searched the ship from top to bottom, expecting to find anything that might explain the emptiness. But all they found were things left behind, like a child's toy in the hold. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no bodies, just a sense of something missing, like the ship had been abandoned by a ghost, not a man. The more they looked, the more they found things that didn't make sense. A locket with a child's name inside, a set of tiny clothes, a bottle of wine with a label in a different language. They never found the crew, or the child, or the wine, just the ship, and the questions that stayed with them like a ghost in the wind. You see, the thing is, no one ever found the ship's log, not a single page, just a ship, a crew, and a mystery that's been sailing through time like a ghost in the fog. They found the water casks, the barrels, the tools, but not the records, as if the ship had been struck by a hand that erased its own story. Some say the crew had a secret, a pact, a curse, but the truth, it's still out there, in the dark, waiting for someone to find it. And that's the one thing that's never been explained. the one detail that has never been explained. You've heard the tale of the Mary Celeste, but what about the stories that grew from it? The ones passed down like heirlooms, whispered in backrooms and over coffee. Some say the captain's ghost still sails with his crew, bound to the ship by a promise he never kept. Others claim the wine barrels were cursed, and the crew drank themselves into oblivion. Some say the crew was lured by a phantom island, others that they were taken by a sea serpent. But the truth? Well, the truth is always just out of reach, like the ship itself. So, what do you think? Did they die, or did they just disappear? And if they're still out there, are they waiting for us to finally find them? So many years have passed, yet the question remains, what really happened to the Mary Celeste? It's as if the sea itself holds its breath, waiting for the truth to surface. We've looked into every log, every letter, every whisper of the past, but the answers just slip through our fingers like sand in the tide. The mystery isn't just about the ship, it's about the people who were on it, and the silence that followed. Maybe the truth is out there, waiting for someone to find it. Or maybe it was never meant to be found. Either way, the sea keeps its secrets. You know, sometimes the most haunting stories aren't the ones that end in screaming or blood, but the ones that vanish without a trace. Like the Mary Celeste, which just disappeared. We chase ghosts for answers, but sometimes the silence is the most terrifying sound of all. Imagine standing on that deck, the wind howling, and the stars above whispering secrets you can't understand. There's something about the sea that makes it easier to believe in ghosts. It's always been there, watching, waiting, and sometimes it takes what it wants without saying goodbye. So, before we go on to the next tale, let me ask you, have you ever wondered what it's like to be lost at sea, with no one to hear your cries? Or what it's like to be the last one left on a ship, staring into the abyss? That's the kind of mystery that lingers long after the lights go out. And that's why we keep telling these stories. To remember, to wonder, and to stay just a little bit afraid. You've heard of the Priory of Sion, haven't you? A secret society, a hidden legacy, and a name that lingers like a whisper in the dark. But what if that whisper is a warning? It was once a sanctuary of knowledge, a place where scholars and mystics gathered under the cover of night. But secrets have a way of becoming burdens, and burdens turn into curses. Legends say the priory was betrayed by its own, and the curse that followed them has never left. It lingers in the silence, in the shadows, and in the hearts of those who dare to uncover its truth. And now, as the sun sets and the world fades into memory, the whispers return. You can almost hear them, just at the edge of your hearing. What do they want? So, what if the Priory of Sion isn't just a place, it's a living thing, waiting for someone to listen? And you, dear listener, are already in its web. You know, the story of the Priory of Sion doesn't start with ghosts or whispers in the dark. It starts with a man named Simon de Montfort, a nobleman in the early 13th century, who had a vision. He claimed to see a light in the distance, a beacon that called him to a hidden place where he would find something eternal. He gathered a group of trusted men, scholars, and warriors, and they followed the light. They found a place where the land was said to be cursed, a valley where the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old secrets. That's where the priory was born, hidden from the world. But the priory was not without its enemies. Rulers and clergy saw them as heretics, and the priory became a target. They were forced to move, to adapt, to hide. The light they once carried became a secret, passed down in whispers and coded messages across centuries. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And so, the legacy of the Priory of Sion became a legend. Some say they were the protectors of ancient knowledge, others believe they were the keepers of a forbidden truth. But one thing is certain, the light they once carried still lingers, waiting to be found. You remember how it started, don't you? A whisper in the wind, a flicker of candlelight, a door that refused to stay closed. It was subtle, like the first chill of autumn, just enough to make you look up. The first time the clock struck midnight and no one was there. The sound was clear, the hands moved, but the room was empty. You felt it like the house itself was waiting for something. Then came the cold spots. Not the kind you feel when you're standing in a draft, but something deeper. You'd be in the middle of a room, and suddenly the air would shift, like the house was holding its breath. And the voices, not loud, not shouting, but just a faint murmur in the corners of your mind, like the house was trying to tell you something. But you weren't sure if it was a warning or a lullaby. You thought it was just your imagination at first. After all, it was an old house, and old houses have a way of making you feel like you're not alone. But then, the signs got harder to ignore. You know, the real horror wasn't the ghosts or the curses, but what happened to the last keeper of the priory, a woman named Eleanor, who took the vows in 1952 and never left. She vanished in 1976, just as the new owner arrived. They found her journal hidden beneath the floorboards, written in a trembling hand. It was full of warnings, but no one listened. The last entry said, "They came for the truth, not the treasure." The new owner, a wealthy businessman named Charles, claimed to be there for the history, but he never found the hidden room, and soon, the priory began to close in on him. He disappeared the same night he tried to break into the sealed cellar. No one has seen or heard from Charles since. The priory sits empty, still and silent, as if waiting for the next soul brave enough to take up the same vows. But some say the walls still remember the last keeper's voice. So, dear listener, if you ever find yourself drawn to the priory, remember this: the walls are not just stone. They are memory, and memory is a very dangerous thing. I remember the first time I heard the whisper in the chapel. It wasn't loud, just a voice like wind through the pews, saying my name. You've ever felt that chill when the world around you stills and the air turns thick? One woman claimed she saw a woman in a 17th century dress walking the cloister, her head bowed as if in prayer. But when she tried to follow, the path vanished. You've ever felt like you were being watched by something that knows your name? A farmer who once lived near the priory said he saw a glowing light in the woods at midnight. He said it hovered like a lantern, but when he tried to approach, it vanished into the trees. You ever seen a light that doesn't belong to this world? And then there was the nun. She said the voices never stopped. They came in the night, whispering secrets in Latin. She tried to write them down, but when she looked back, the words had changed. You've ever felt like the world was speaking to you in a language you couldn't understand? These are not just stories. They're echoes of something that still lingers. You ever felt like you were standing on the edge of a secret that was never meant to be uncovered? We followed the trail of whispers to the abandoned archives of the priory, where dust motes danced in the dim light like tiny ghosts. The air smelled of old paper and secrets waiting to be unearthed. The first clue was a faded letter, penned in a shaky hand, warning of a hidden chamber beneath the cloisters. It felt like the past was reaching out, whispering its warnings through the cracks in the stone. Inside the chamber, we found a sealed, iron-bound chest. It was cold to the touch, and the air around it seemed to vibrate with an unspoken energy, as though the past was trapped inside. When we opened the chest, we found only one thing: a small, silver locket, engraved with the priory's crest. It was warm to the touch, as if it had been waiting for someone to find it again. But the locket was not the only thing that stirred. As we held it, we felt a strange pull, as if the past was reaching for us once more, and the legacy of the priory had not yet finished its story. You know, the thing that's always bugged me is this one tiny detail: no one ever explains it. It's like a missing puzzle piece, and no one wants to talk about it. It's not the whole story, not even half of it. It's just one thing: a name, a date, a place. Something so small, yet so vital. You feel it missing, like a shadow in the corner of your eye. You think it's a cover-up, a mistake? No, it's something worse. It's like the story was written by someone who didn't want to be remembered, or worse, someone who didn't want to be found. And so, the story ends. But the question lingers. What was that one detail? What did it mean? And why did no one ever want to say? You know, some say the real curse isn't in the stones or the blood, but in the stories people tell. The ones passed down like heirlooms, whispered in the dark, like the tale of the last prioress who vanished without a trace. Some say the priory was built on a sacred site, but others say it was built on a grave that still remembers. And if you listen closely, maybe you can hear it too. And then there are the local farmers who claim they've seen the prioress's shadow at dusk walking the same path she once did. A shadow that never walks alone. Some say the curse was never about the past, it was about the present. That the priory is still alive, waiting for someone to wake it up. And if you're ever curious about what really happened there, just remember, the truth is still buried in the earth, waiting for the right hands and the right heart to dig it up. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the ghosts, but the silence that follows. The Priory of Sion has left more than just a legacy, it's left a question that still lingers in the air, unanswered. Every clue leads somewhere, but nothing ever connects. A missing key, a sealed chamber, and a journal that ends mid-sentence like the writer was interrupted by something far more terrifying than the dark. The last keeper of the priory, a woman named Elise, vanished without a trace. Some say she was taken by the past. Others say she simply chose to disappear, leaving behind only her notes and a chilling final letter. And now, every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, people say they hear her voice, soft, distant, calling from the stones. A whisper that never repeats, but lingers like smoke in the cold air. So here's the thing, dear listener. If you ever find yourself near the priory, and you hear that voice, don't chase it. It might not be a ghost. It might be the past, finally speaking. You've walked through the echoes of a secret older than time, where whispers of the past refuse to fade. What do you think lingers in the quiet corners of the priory's shadow? The stones remember, even when the world moves on. Have you ever felt the weight of something ancient pressing against your soul? The road ahead is long and the stories are many, but for now, let the silence settle and the shadows stretch a little longer. Stay with me and we'll see what comes next. The past is never truly gone, it just waits for the right moment to whisper again. Let's not linger too long in the dark. There's more to come and the stories are always hungry for more. You've heard of the Titanic, but there's a ship that vanished with over 1,000 souls quietly, without a sound. The SS Mendy. You ever wonder what happens when a ship disappears like it never existed? It wasn't a warship. Not really. It was a passenger liner, built for comfort, not combat. But the Mendy was carrying something far more dangerous than passengers, over 1,000 men, all bound for war. No bodies were found, no wreckage. Just an empty sea and a name that lingers in the hearts of those who remember, and in the places where the wind whispers through the waves. Some say the Mendy still sails silent, waiting. So, what do you think? Was it a miracle or something far darker? And if the Mendy still sails, where is it going and who is it taking? You know, it all started with a letter that changed everything. The British government had planned to transport a whole battalion of men across the Atlantic, and they picked the SS Mendy to do it. But what they didn't realize was that the ship was about to carry more than just soldiers. These were South African soldiers, the King's African Rifles, fighting for the British in World War I. They were proud, brave, and ready to go home. But the ship was packed with more than just men. It was packed with hope, and a lot of it. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Smart Speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The plan was simple: cross the ocean, bring them home. But the ocean had other ideas. On the night of February 18th, 1917, the Mendy hit a mine and sank. The water was cold, the night was dark, and the men were caught in a storm they never saw coming. Of the 1,776 men on board, over 600 didn't make it. They were lost to the sea, their bodies never recovered. And in the days that followed, the world barely noticed, until the silence of the ocean spoke louder than any war ever could. The Mendy became more than just a ship. It became a symbol of sacrifice, of loss, and of the quiet horror of war. And now, decades later, its story still lingers like a ghost in the waves, waiting to be heard. You remember the sky that day, don't you? That eerie, washed-out gray that clung to the horizon like a veil, making everything feel just a little too quiet. You could almost hear the silence. The crew of the Mendy was used to the sea, but even they noticed something off. A stillness that didn't belong, like the ocean had forgotten how to move. The radio crackled with static, but no one could get through. It was like the world had turned its back on them, and the sea had grown tired of waiting. And then, just as the sun began to rise, the Mendy started to sink, not with a crash, but with a slow, dreadful pull, like the sea had finally remembered how to swallow a ship. No one saw the bottom, no one saw the end, but the sea remembers, and sometimes it calls out for the ones it took. You remember the sound of waves against a wooden hull, don't you? That lull of the sea, so familiar, so comforting. But on the morning of February 18th, 1917, those waves grew heavy, and the Mendy didn't just vanish, it was swallowed whole. The Mendy was carrying nearly 2,000 men, soldiers of the British Army, many of them young, some just boys. They were heading home from the trenches, but the sea had other plans, and no one saw it coming. The men on board were not just soldiers, they were brothers, fathers, sons. And when the Mendy went down, it took them all, and left behind a silence so deep it still echoes in the hearts of those who remember. No bodies were ever found, no wreckage, just a sea that swallowed everything, and a history that refuses to let the Mendy go so easily. It lingers in the stories, the silence, and the memory of a ship that vanished without a sound. You might not have heard of the Mendy before, but if you've ever felt a strange chill on the water, or heard a voice in the wind, or felt a presence in the dark, it might just be the Mendy, still waiting to be remembered. I remember the first time I heard about the Mendy. A sailor, old and grizzled, told me about a ghost ship that never made it to port. He said it was always there, just beyond the mist, waiting for the right moment to vanish. Another man, a former crewman, swore he saw the Mendy in a dream. He said it was all black and silver, like a mirage, and the crew was silent, not moving, just standing in a row like they were waiting for something. One witness, a young woman, claimed she saw the Mendy in the early 1930s. She said it was a quiet, mournful ship, with no lights, no sound, just the sound of waves. She said it looked like it was crying. Some say the Mendi wasn't just a ghost ship, but a reminder, a warning of what happens when dreams turn to tragedy. A ship that carried hope and then carried sorrow. These stories are more than just tales. They are pieces of a puzzle, fragment of a truth that time has tried to erase. And sometimes, the past just won't let go. They dug deep, you know. The investigators, they weren't just looking for names. They were hunting for the truth, and it led them to places where no one ever wanted to go. One report mentioned a cabin on the island where the Mendi made its final stop, a place where the sea was calm and the sky was heavy with the weight of secrets. They found letters, you know, letters written in a shaky hand, filled with fear and confusion. Some said the ship was never supposed to be there. Others said the crew vanished without a sound. And then there was the map, a crude, hand-drawn map of the island, with markings that didn't match any known geography. Some said it was a warning, others a promise. The investigators didn't just find records, they found stories. Stories of people who said they saw things, but no one would believe them. And that's when the real mystery began. Some said the sea remembered. Some said the island was never meant to be found. And some said the Mendi wasn't lost at all, just waiting for someone to listen. There's one thing about the Mendi that's never been explained, and it's the most haunting part of all. You see, the ship was never found. No wreckage, no bodies, no distress calls. Just silence, like the sea swallowed it whole, and the ocean forgot to tell us. You ever wonder what it feels like to vanish without a trace? And yet, the crew? They were real people, with families, with names, with lives. You can almost hear their voices in the wind, or feel their hands in the sand. But no one knows for sure what happened. So, what do you think? Was it the sea, or something else? The Mendi's story isn't over. It just waits for you to listen. You've heard the tales of the SS Mendi, but what about the ones that started long after it sank? Some say the ship's ghost still lingers in the waters off South Africa, waiting for the right storm to wake it up again. Local fishermen claim they've seen lights flickering beneath the waves, like the ship itself is trying to signal for help. They say the Mendi doesn't just sink, it haunts those who forget its story. Some say the ship's crew still walks the shore at dusk, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Others believe the Mendi's captain, Jameson, is still searching for the lost souls he failed to save. And then there are the whispers. Some say the Mendi isn't a ghost, but a warning. A reminder that even in the most peaceful waters, history can rise again, silent and unrelenting. So, the next time you hear the waves, you might just wonder what stories are still waiting to be heard beneath the surface. You know, some mysteries don't just fade away, they linger, like a shadow in the corner of your eye. The SS Mendi's story is one of those. It haunts not just the sea, but the hearts of those who still search for answers. Every year, new clues surface, but they're like whispers in the wind, fleeting, hard to grasp. Researchers pore over old logs, but the truth feels just out of reach, like a ghost that won't stay. There's a quiet hope that one day, someone will find that final piece of the puzzle. But for now, we're left with questions, and the sea, unforgiving and vast, remains the only witness to what happened. And so, the story of the SS Mendi continues to be told not just in books, but in the hearts of those who still listen for the echo of its name. You walked with me through the mist of history, through the quiet sorrow of the sea, and the weight of a ship that never made it home. But remember, the ocean has its own memory, and it doesn't forget. Sometimes, the most haunting stories are the ones that end with a question, not an answer. And sometimes, the silence is louder than any scream. As you go about your day, remember that the past is never truly gone. It lives in the wind, in the waves, and in the stories we choose to tell. And when you hear the wind, or feel the cold, or see a shadow that doesn't belong, remember, you are not alone. The ocean still watches. You ever heard of the SS Marine Mermaid? It wasn't just any ship. It was a luxury liner, sleek and silver, built to float on the open sea with the promise of adventure. But what if I told you it vanished without a trace, and the sea never forgot it? The ship was built in 1939, during the golden age of ocean travel. It was meant to be a symbol of American pride, a place where the wealthy could sail in style, sipping champagne and dancing to jazz. But the sea has a way of swallowing even the grandest dreams. The stories start with whispers, sailors who saw lights in the dark or heard voices calling from the water. Some say the ship is still afloat, waiting for the right moment to return. Others say it's not the ship that's haunted, but the people who are on it. And then there are the locals, the ones who live near the coast, who know the tides and the story is passed down through generations. They say the sea is still waiting for answers. And maybe it's waiting for you. You know, The Marine Mermaid wasn't just a ship, it was a place where dreams and nightmares collided. Built in 1943, it was one of the last of the Great Liberty ships, a symbol of hope during the darkest days of the war. But behind the patriotism and purpose, there were men, some brave, some desperate, some just trying to survive the chaos of war. And some of them made choices that would echo through the years. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The crew is a patchwork of men from all over the world, brought together by the war, not by choice. Some were veterans, others just young boys who thought they were joining a cause. And then there were the things that happened on board, small at first, like a missing tool or a whisper in the dark, but they grew. And no one ever really knew what started it. The stories came later, from sailors who swore they saw things that shouldn't be seen, and from those who said they never left. Not really, not ever. You remember the day the mermaid slipped away, don't you? The last time we saw her, she was just a ghost of herself, drifting through the harbor like a forgotten memory. The crew said she was acting strange, like something had taken hold of her soul. Her bow was tilted, her lights flickering, and her engines were silent, as if she had no will left to move. They tried to call her back, but the radio was dead, and when they tried to steer her, the wheel wouldn't budge, like the sea itself had claimed her. The last thing they heard was a sound like a scream, but no one could say who was screaming. It was as if the ship had swallowed the sound whole. And then, nothing. Just silence. And the mermaid, gone, like she had never been there at all. You ever wonder what happens when a ship sinks in the middle of the night, with no one left to tell the tale? The SS Marine Mermaid vanished in 1942, and no one knows if it was a storm, sabotage, or something far darker. The last radio transmission was a distorted scream, like someone was shouting over a storm, and then silence. No distress call, no coordinates, just a ship and a void where it should have been. They found a few personal items washed ashore: belts, buttons, a locket with a faded photo of a young woman. But no bodies, no wreckage, just the echo of a ship that never should have disappeared. The mystery of the mermaid is still unsolved, but the sea remembers. And if you listen closely, you might hear it whispering in the waves, calling your name. I remember the first time I heard the name Marine Mermaid. It was whispered like a curse over coffee at the marina, a name that seemed to carry the weight of more than just waves. A retired fisherman told me about the time he saw a figure in the mist, standing on a bow of the ship, wearing a dress that shimmered like the sea itself. He said it looked like a woman, but it wasn't a woman at all. A nurse on the island claimed she saw a child in the water, her tiny hands reaching for the shore, her face pale and frozen in fear. She said it was a girl, no older than 8, with hair like the sea foam. Some say the mermaid isn't just a ghost, she's a warning, a reminder that the sea doesn't forget, and that some stories are better left in the dark. We followed the whispers of the mermaid to a dockside warehouse, where the air smelled of salt and old rust. The doors groaned open, and we stepped into a world that had forgotten time. Inside, we found old records, yellowed and brittle like the skin of a long-dead sailor. Each page told a different story, but all of them led back to the same name, Eliza Voss. One photo caught my eye: a young woman standing on the deck, her smile too bright, her eyes too knowing. The caption read, Eliza Voss, 1942, last voyage. We found a ledger, a tattered notebook filled with dates and names, but no answers. It was as if someone had tried to forget the truth, and the sea had helped them. As we left, the wind picked up, carrying with it the sound of distant waves and a voice, faint but unmistakable, calling our names from the depths of the sea. You've heard the stories about the mermaid, but what about the one thing no one can seem to agree on? The one detail that has never been explained. Some say it was a simple mistake, a misread log, a wrong turn in the fog. Others insist it was something more, something the ocean itself refuses to let go. It's not the disappearance that haunts people, it's the silence. The way the ship just vanished, without a sound, without a trace. No distress call, no distress signal. So, what do you think? Was it a mistake, a ghost, or something the ocean has always wanted to keep hidden? That's the one detail that has never been explained. You've heard the stories, but some folks say the real secret lies in the local legends, those whispered tales passed down like heirlooms. Some say the mermaid wasn't just a ship, but a gateway to something far older. There's a legend about a curse tied to the sea, a dark pact made in the name of gold. Some say the mermaid was never meant to sail, but was instead a vessel for something far more sinister. Others say the mermaid's fate was sealed by the sea itself, that the ship was never lost, but rather it was swallowed by the ocean's memory. Some say the waters still whisper her name, and then there are those who believe the mermaid was never a ship at all, that it was a ghost ship, always arriving and always leaving, waiting for the right soul to board. There's still no official word on what happened to the marine mermaid. Some say she sank in a storm, others say she was torpedoed. But no bodies were ever recovered, and the records are all missing. The Coast Guard says they searched for survivors, but no one was found, and the last radio transmission was just static and a faint, broken voice saying "help me." No one knows what happened to the crew, and the ship's fate remains a mystery. Some say it's still out there, waiting for the right storm to bring it back. And to this day, the stories keep coming. Whether it's a ghost ship, a curse, or something else entirely, the marine mermaid's secrets are still in the water. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest secrets. The sea, with all its endless blue, has a way of swallowing more than just ships. The mermaid, she was a beauty, but beauty can be a cruel thing. And when the sea takes something, it doesn't always let it go so easily. Sometimes, the only thing left to do is listen. To the sea, to the wind, to the stories that refuse to be buried. And so, we leave the mermaid song on the waves. But remember, the sea never forgets. And neither do we. You ever heard of a place where the air feels heavier, like the weight of secrets pressing down on your chest? The Priory of Sion, nestled in the misty hills of France, has been whispered about for centuries. Some say it's haunted by children who never grew up. It was once a place of learning, a refuge for scholars and thinkers. But something shifted, something dark. The last known records of the priory date back to the 13th century, and since then, it's been a place of mystery, silence, and strange occurrences. Tourists come, drawn by the stories. Some say they've seen shadows moving where there's no one. Others swear they heard whispers in a language they don't understand. But no one stays long. The Priory of Sion isn't just a place, it's a memory that won't let go. And so, we begin our journey into the heart of the Priory of Sion, where the walls hold secrets, and the children are still waiting. You know, the story of the Priory of Sion isn't just about ghosts or secrets. It began with a group of scholars, philosophers, and mystics who believed in something deeper than just history. They were called the Priory, and they were hiding something powerful. These scholars weren't just hiding knowledge, they were protecting it. You see, they believed in a secret lineage, a bloodline that traced back to the Knights Templar and held the keys to ancient wisdom. It was a dangerous thing to believe in, back then. But the Priory was more than just a secret society. It was a refuge for those who had been hunted, exiled, or betrayed for their beliefs. Some say they were protecting a manuscript, others claim they were guarding a bloodline. Either way, they were hiding in plain sight. And then came the French Revolution. The Priory was forced to scatter. Some fled to Spain, others to Italy, and a few to the Americas. The line of protectors was broken, and the secret they once guarded faded into myth until someone started looking for it again. You remember how the first hints of something wrong always come in the quietest moments, like when the wind stops and the air feels too heavy for the sky. It's not the scream, it's the silence after. The caretaker found the first child's drawing in the dust of the old playroom, just a simple stick figure with a tiny crown. But the eyes were wide, as if looking right at you. Then came the smell of burnt sugar, sweet and wrong, lingering in the air even after the kitchen had been cleaned. It was the kind of smell that makes your stomach twist, even when you know it's not real. The old nurse said the children never cried when they were taken. They just looked at the walls, and then they vanished, one by one, like they'd never been there at all. And then, just before the last child was taken, the clock in the towers stopped at 3:07. Not broken, just frozen. Like time itself had held its breath. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You see it now, don't you? The child's small hand reaching out from the darkness, fingers curling like ivy around the stone wall. A whisper of breath, a sound like a sigh, and then nothing. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and old wood. No one heard the cry. No one saw the door open. Just the sound of a child's voice, soft, lost, and echoing through the stone. The keepers of the priory say the child was never there. They say the wind plays tricks. But the stone remembers, and the silence is too long. Sometimes the wind carries a voice, soft, familiar, and just out of reach. It's not a warning, not a cry for help. It's a memory, waiting to be remembered. You've heard the stories, haven't you? But now, you're listening, and the silence is beginning to speak. I've spoken to several locals who claim to have seen the children running through the woods at dusk, their laughter echoing like wind chimes in the dark. One man told me he saw a little girl with braids and a red ribbon in her hair, dancing alone by the old well, her face lit by the moon. Another woman swore she heard them singing a lullaby in the dead of night, the sound so clear it made her cry, though she couldn't place the words. They say the children are not lost, they are waiting for someone to remember them, to find them, to bring them home. We followed the trail of whispers to the archives of the local historical society. The air smelled of old paper and candle wax, and the silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. There, we found a brittle ledger from 1892, filled with names, dates, and a single line that made our skin crawl. 3 children vanished on the night of the full moon. The names matched the children who had been reported missing over the years, each one a mystery, each one a piece of a puzzle that had been buried for over a century. But there was something else in the ledger notes in a different hand, written in a shaky, frantic script. It spoke of a ritual, of a place hidden beneath the priory, and of a curse that had not yet run its course. And then, in the margins, a name appeared again and again, never once in the main list, but always in the footnotes. A name we had never heard before, but one that now felt like a whisper in our own bones. You know, the thing that really haunts me about this whole thing isn't the children or the monastery, it's the fact that no one ever found a single child shoe. Not one. Think about it, dozens of children, all gone, and yet not a single pair of shoes was ever recovered. It's like the ground itself swallowed them whole. I've spoken to historians, archivists, even some of the descendants of the monks. No one can explain it. It's like the truth was buried with them, and that's what really makes me shiver, not the ghosts, not the stories, but the silence. The silence that says we were here, and then we weren't. You know, some folks say the real ghosts here aren't the ones you see, but the ones you hear, like the whispers in the wind that sound like little kids laughing in the night. There's a tale that during the 1920s, a family of 5 vanished without a trace, and their children were never found. Some say they were taken by the priory's dark past, others say they were never there at all. Some say the children were never real, just echoes of a terrible secret buried by time. Others swear they're still here, waiting for someone to listen. And if you ever hear that laugh again, don't chase it, just listen. Some secrets don't want to be found. And still, the question lingers, what became of those lost children? Did they vanish into the shadows of the priory, or were they spirited away by forces we cannot yet comprehend? No records, no bodies, just whispers in the wind and the faintest echo of laughter in the stillness. It's as if the priory itself holds its breath, waiting for someone to ask the right question. We may never know what happened in those hidden rooms, but the priory still stands silent, watchful, and full of secrets that refuse to be buried. So the next time you pass by, pause a moment, ask the priory its story, and maybe it will answer. You've walked with me through the mist of the priory's past, through echoes of lost children and ancient secrets. What do you think lingers in the silence of those stone halls? Was it a curse, a forgotten ritual, or just the weight of time pressing down on a place that never let go? And when the next tale begins, will you be ready to listen again, or will you stay here, in the quiet of the unknown? Until then, remember, some stories don't end. They just wait for you to hear them again. You ever heard of a place where the walls whisper secrets and the silence screams louder than any voice? That's Holloway Prison, a place that once held more than just prisoners. Built in the 1860s, it was meant to be a model for humane reform, but soon became known for its brutality, its cold iron, and the whispers of those who never left. The stories say that the prison was haunted by the ghosts of those who died in the dark, and the echoes of their last cries still linger in the halls. Now it's a ruin, but the legends live on. Some say the midnight murders never ended, and the spirits still wait for someone to hear their final plea. You know, the story of Holloway Prison begins not with chains or screams, but with a man named Thomas Holloway, a wealthy philanthropist with a passion for reform. He envisioned a place where the guilty could be rehabilitated, not punished. But even the best intentions can lead to the worst outcomes. The prison opened in 1823, right at the heart of London, in a place that was once a patch of mud and mire. They built it with high hopes, brick and iron, but the spirit of the land was not so easily tamed. The first prisoners were mostly debtors and petty criminals, but soon the prison filled with those who had been sentenced for more serious crimes. And the conditions? Well, let's just say the reformers had a lot to learn about the human spirit. As the years passed, the prison became known for its strict regime and high mortality rate. The inmates were kept in silence, under the watchful eyes of guards who were more like jailers than reformers. And it was in this silence that the whispers began. Some say the prison was built on sacred ground, and the spirits of those who died there refused to be forgotten. Others say the real ghosts are the ones who never left, trapped in the cruel system they were meant to escape. You remember how things started to change, don't you? The lights flickered more often, and the clocks in the cells would stop at 11:59, then start again at midnight. It was like the whole place had a heartbeat of its own. The guards started whispering about voices in the cells, not the prisoners' voices, but something else, something that didn't belong. You could hear it at night, a low hum, like a lullaby that never ended. The prisoners, too, started acting strangely. Some refused to sleep, Others would wake up in the middle of the night trembling, claiming they had been locked in cells they never entered. And then there were the disappearances, not of prisoners, but of the guards. One by one, they went missing, and no one could say where they had gone. The prison was still standing, but something had shifted in the air. You can almost feel it now, can't you? That sense of something watching, waiting, just beyond the reach of the light. That's when the first real fear began to settle in. You've heard the whispers of Holloway Prison, but now you're standing in the silence where it all began. The air is heavy with the weight of history, and the stone walls seem to hold their breath. One night, in the dead of winter, a prisoner vanished without a sound. The guards heard nothing, saw nothing, but the cell door was locked from the inside. The next morning, the prisoner was gone. The guards had no idea how, but the prison was locked from the inside, and the cell had been empty all night. No one ever found the prisoner. No one ever explained how they vanished. But the scent of lavender, the locked door, and the silence that followed it all lingers like a ghost. You might wonder, was it a trick of the light? A trick of the mind? But in Holloway, the truth is never so simple and never so quiet. I spoke to an elderly man who lived near Holloway in the 1950s. He swore he saw a figure in a white dress walking the prison grounds at midnight, always heading toward the east gate. He said the figure never spoke, never moved fast, and always seemed to be looking for something. He called it the Lost Girl, a name that stuck with many who have heard the tale. One woman, who worked as a nurse in the 1970s, claimed she heard whispers in the night. She said they sounded like children's voices, echoing from the cells, calling for help. She never saw the children, but she swore the whispers stopped the moment she turned the light on. She called it the crying of the forgotten. The last witness I found was a retired guard. He said he saw a shadow move in the cell block one night. It didn't look like any prisoner, and it never moved like a ghost. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. He said it just stood there watching him, and then it vanished like it had never been there at all. The investigation began with a whisper, a name repeated in hushed tones, Holloway. No one wanted to say it aloud, as if the very sound might awaken something. We followed the trail of old letters, prison records, and faded photographs. They found the cell numbers, the dates, the names of the lost. But the more they dug, the more the records seemed to shift, dates moved, names erased, as if the prison itself had a hand in its own silence. One file stood out, a ledger from the 1940s, filled with entries that didn't match the official records. Names repeated, dates that didn't add up. It felt like someone had tried to rewrite the past, but the ink had bled through. They started asking the right questions about the prisoners, the guards, the disappearances. But the deeper they went, the more the answers faded, like footprints in the rain. And then, one of them found something that shouldn't have been there, a name, a date, a story that didn't belong to the prison. It was as if the past had reached out, whispering, "You're not the first to ask." You've heard the whispers, the tales of the midnight murders at Holloway Prison. But there's one thing no one can agree on: what exactly was found in that cell. The one that never saw the light of day. Some say it was a child's toy, others claim it was a wedding ring. But no one can say for sure. The prison records are missing that day, and the guard who was on duty has long since passed. And yet, no one dares to go back. Not even the most daring of historians. It's as if the prison guards itself, keeping that one detail locked away, like a secret it's never meant to share. So, what do you think? Was it a toy, a ring, or something far more personal? The truth, like the prison itself, remains shrouded in silence and shadow. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what the town's oldest barkeep really thinks? He says the prisoners never truly left, just the walls, the stones, and the silence. Some say the ghosts are still trying to find their way out. Others say they're waiting for the next soul to wander too close. But no one ever asks what they're waiting for. The town still holds its annual lantern-lit walk, but it's not for the living. They say it's to honor the lost, to keep the spirits from growing restless. Or maybe it's just to make sure no one gets lost themselves. And still, every so often, someone claims to hear a voice from the prison calling out in the night. They don't say what it's asking for, just that it's waiting, and waiting, and waiting. And yet, the prison stands, a silent witness to the past, its walls still whispering secrets we can't quite grasp. You ever wonder if the ghosts are just the echoes of the living? No official records, no closure, just a lingering sense that something was never truly buried. What if the real mystery isn't the murders, but the silence that followed? You can't help but wonder, were they silenced by fear, or by something far more insidious? And if they're still here, Are they waiting for someone to finally listen? The midnight murders of Holloway Prison may have been solved in the eyes of the law, but in the hearts of those who remember, the questions are far from over. You ever notice how silence can be the loudest sound when you're alone in the dark? Sometimes, the quietest moments hold the weight of 1,000 unspoken secrets. Holloway Prison may be gone, but the echoes of its past still linger. You can almost hear the whisper of a prisoner's last words, lost in the cold, damp air. There's a kind of poetry in the way the past refuses to be buried. It waits, just like the ghosts, for someone to listen. So, as we turn the page, I'll leave you with this: some stories don't end, they just linger. And sometimes, they wait for you. You've heard the name Lizzie Borden, right? That old story about the axe, the house, and the town that never quite let go. But let me tell you, it's not just a house. It's a place where time seems to pause, and the walls themselves seem to hold their breath. This isn't your typical haunted house. It's a place where the past refuses to stay buried. You can feel it in the silence, that strange, waiting silence, like the house is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The house itself is a character with its own secrets and stories. Every room seems to whisper, though you can't quite make out what it's saying. Some say the walls remember the events of that summer, and the echoes of the past linger in every shadow. But here's the thing. You don't need to believe in ghosts to feel the weight of the place. It's the way the air feels heavy, the way the silence stretches too long, and the way the house seems to watch you. It's not just haunted, it's waiting. You know, the Borden family wasn't the first to live in that old house. It had a name before Lizzie, a name that carries its own weight. It was called the Pine Street House back in the day, and it was built for a man named Andrew Jackson Loomis. Andrew Loomis was a businessman, a man of means, but he had a temper. He built the house with grand designs, but it was said he never really felt at home there. Rumors say he was haunted by the ghost of his first wife, who died in a suspicious fire years before he ever moved in. But the house itself was a character in its own right. It was built on land that had a long, dark history. The previous owners had been accused of witchcraft, and the land was said to have been cursed by a Native American chief who had been wronged by settlers. And then, of course, there was the tragedy that would change the house's fate forever. Lizzie Borden was born into this place, and though she would later become infamous, she was once just a girl who played in the halls of the Pine Street house, dreaming of a life that would one day take a dark turn. You remember the first time you heard it, didn't you? A faint, whispering sound, like a voice just out of reach, curling through the air like smoke. It wasn't loud, but it made your skin prickle. It came at night when the house seemed to hold its breath. You couldn't tell if it was the wind or something else, but it was definitely there, just beyond your hearing. One night, you woke up and heard it clearly. A voice, low and trembling, calling your name. You didn't answer, and the sound faded, but it left you with a cold, heavy silence in your chest. You began to notice things small, strange details that didn't match the story you'd heard before. A photograph that had been moved, a door slightly ajar, a faint smell of lilacs in the air, even though no one had ever mentioned it. And then, one morning, you found it. A message, written in chalk on the wall, just outside your door. It wasn't a warning, it was a question. And it was addressed to you. You remember the story of the house, don't you? The one where a woman was accused of murder, and the walls seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the truth to come out. But the real chill isn't in the story, it's in the silence between the lines, the spaces where the truth never fully revealed itself. The house didn't just hold a crime, it held the weight of a woman's life, a family's grief, and a town's whispered judgment. And now, decades later, the walls still whisper, not of murder, not of guilt, but of a life that was never truly understood. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a woman who said she heard the sound of a woman's voice, clear and mournful, echoing through the halls at midnight. She said it was Lizzie calling her name as if to warn her of something she'd never forget. Another witness claimed to see a shadowy figure in the attic, moving like smoke, never quite solid, never quite gone. She said it was there to protect the house from those who would try to uncover its secrets. Some say the house remembers, that every visitor leaves a trace, a whisper, a memory that lingers like the scent of old wood and candle wax. It's as if the walls are telling a story they can't quite finish. And then there are those who say the house is not haunted at all, but waiting for someone to finally understand what happened there, and why the walls still speak, even after all these years. The investigators arrived with clipboards and caution, ready to peel back the layers of history. They moved through the house like ghosts themselves, eyes wide with wonder and unease. They found old letters tucked in the floorboards, written in a shaky hand talking about things that never happened. It was like the house was telling secrets it didn't want to share. One of the researchers said the walls were warm to the touch, as if they had a heartbeat. It was a strange feeling, like the house was alive and watching. They found a door that didn't belong, nobody had built it. It stood in the corner like a ghost, just waiting to be opened. But no one dared to. The deeper they went, the more the house seemed to resist them. It was like the walls were whispering, not in words, but in feelings, fear, loneliness, and something else entirely. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You know, the one thing they never explain is how the walls just stopped whispering. It wasn't a sudden silence, no. It was like the house held its breath. Some say it was the day the last real ghost left. Others say the house was tired of playing its part. There's no record of it, no official report. Just a strange quiet that fell over the house like a shroud. Some say the whispers were never real, just the house remembering what it once knew. Others say it's waiting for someone to come back and ask the right question. So, what do you think? Was the house ever truly haunted? Or was it just a place where people remembered what they wanted to believe? And if it's waiting for what? Maybe the real mystery isn't the whispers. Maybe it's the silence that follows them. And maybe that silence is still waiting for you. You've heard the stories, but what about the people who still live them? Some say the house isn't just haunted, it's a keeper of secrets, and the locals still whisper theories about what really happened. Some believe the whispers in the walls are not just echoes of the past, but warnings, reminders that the house is alive and it doesn't like to be disturbed. Others think the house is just a place where people go to escape their own ghosts, where they come to confront the past, and sometimes they don't leave the same as they arrived. And then there are the ones who swear they heard something that wasn't just a voice. It was a presence, a hand on their shoulder, or a step behind them in the dark. So, what do you think? Is the house truly haunted? Or is it just a place where the past refuses to be forgotten? You know, sometimes the most unsettling things are the ones we can't prove. The Lizzie Borden story has haunted the house for over a century, but the truth, it's still tangled in the shadows. The trial, the verdict, the whispers of a woman's fate, none of it feels settled. It's like the house is holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally say, "Tell us the truth." There's a strange comfort in the mystery, like the house isn't just haunted, it's waiting. But what? A confession? A closure? Or just to remind us that some stories never end. And so, the walls still whisper, not of murder, but of memory, of a time when a woman stood at the edge of history, and the world never quite decided if she was a villain or a victim. The house still stands. The truth, well, it's still out there somewhere, waiting for someone to find it. And until then, the walls will keep whispering. You know, sometimes the scariest things aren't the ghosts but the silence that follows them. Like the house holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. We all have our own haunted places, don't we? The old house where we grew up, or the one we visited as children. Places that feel just a little too familiar. So, as we wrap up this tale, I leave you with this. What haunts you? What whispers in the dark when you're alone? Let me know, just not in the comments. Some things are best left to the imagination. Stay warm, stay curious, and until next time, may your nights be filled with stories that linger longer than the day. You've heard the name Lizzie Borden, right? The woman who supposedly killed her father and stepmother with an axe. But the real story, it's not just about a murder, it's about a house that whispers secrets to this day. This house wasn't always haunted. It was built in 1854, a grand Victorian home with high ceilings and intricate woodwork. But when Lizzie Borden was accused of the murders, the place became a symbol of scandal and fear. Now, over a century later, the house is a museum, but some say it's still alive. People claim they hear voices, footsteps, and whispers in the halls, especially at night when the wind howls through the eaves. The story of Lizzie Borden is more than just a murder. It's about a woman in a patriarchal society, a case that sparked public outrage, and a house that's never been the same since. So, what do you think it's whispering to us now? We're not just visiting a house. We're stepping into the heart of a mystery that still lingers in the walls. What do you think you'll hear when you walk through those doors? You know, the Borden family didn't start off as ghosts. They were just a normal, if somewhat peculiar, family in Fall River, Massachusetts. And Lizzie? She was the eldest daughter, sharp as a knife and full of spunk, though she'd probably say that's an understatement. Her father, Andrew, was a businessman with a temper, and her stepmother, Abby, was the kind of woman who could make you feel like a bug in her kitchen. Their marriage was a storm and a teacup. and Lizzie was caught right in the middle of it. The house itself was a relic of the 1800s, with its creaking floorboards and rooms that felt like they remembered every whispered secret. It was a place where time stood still, and where the air always seemed to hum with something just out of reach. And then there was the matter of the 1892 murder, which turned Lizzie into a cautionary tale and the house into a place where the past refused to stay buried. But let's not jump ahead first. We have to understand the story that led to it. You remember the quiet of that summer day, the kind that makes you forget how hot it really is. But something in the air felt heavier than the heat, like the house itself was holding its breath. The neighbors said nothing, but you could feel their eyes on you as you walked past. The silence was too loud, like the house was waiting for you to break it. That night, you heard it a whisper, so faint it could have been the wind. But the wind didn't speak in such a way. It was like the house was trying to tell you something, and you weren't sure if it was a warning or a promise. You told yourself it was just the house settling, the old wood creaking, but the whisper grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the trees. It was the house, and it had something to say. By morning, you were certain something had changed. The air felt different, the silence deeper, and the house no longer seemed like a place you could simply walk through. It had become something else entirely. You remember the rumors, don't you? That the house was built on a grave, that walls remembered the screams of a mother's last cries. And then came the silence. A silence so thick, it pressed against your ears like a veil. One morning, the owner found the body of a young woman, her throat slit. No one knew who she was. No one knew how she got there. Just that the house had swallowed her whole, like a secret it wasn't ready to let go of. They tried to bury the truth, but the house had other plans. It kept whispering, not in words, but in the way the wind moaned through the cracks, in the way the floorboards groaned like a heartbeat underfoot. And so, the house became a museum of silence, a place where the past still lived, where the walls remembered the blood, the fear, and the final, unspoken truth that no one ever dared to speak aloud. I met a woman from Fall River who swore she heard the voice of a little girl calling her name in the Borden house. She said it wasn't loud, just soft, like a secret. She said the voice came from the upstairs rooms, like it was trying to reach someone who wasn't there. And when she asked the housekeeper about it, the woman just smiled and said, "Some folks hear things." He never told anyone, said it was too strange, too real. And when he passed away, his wife found a note in his pocket that read, "The house remembers." Some say the house doesn't just whisper, it waits for the right person, the right time, the right question. And when you ask, it answers in a way you'll never forget. We followed the trail of whispers to the basement where the air grew colder and the walls seemed to hum with a secret. The floorboards groaned as if they knew the truth, and the dust settled in strange, swirling patterns like something had been here just recently. There, we found a hidden compartment beneath the floor, sealed with rusted nails and a faded lock. Inside lay a bundle of letters, yellowed with age, and a single locket with a faded photograph of a woman and a young girl, both smiling, both missing. We pried open the hidden door, revealing a small, sealed room, its walls lined with books and a single, dusty mirror. The mirror reflected not our faces, but a woman in a 19th century dress, her eyes locked on us, her lips moving silently. We stepped back, heart pounding, as the woman raised a hand in warning. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and for a moment, it felt as though the walls themselves were breathing, holding their breath, waiting for the truth to be spoken. And then, the whispering stopped. The air grew still, and the mirror, once alive with presence, became nothing more than a reflection of the quiet, haunted house, waiting for the next curious soul to listen. You know, the thing that's never been explained is the sound, not the creaks or the whispers, but the one that only Lizzie heard, the one that made her scream in the middle of the night. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. No one else heard it. Not the servants, not the neighbors, just her, and no one ever asked what it was. They all just assumed she was going mad. Some say it was a ghost. Others say it was the wind, or the house itself, or the weight of guilt. But none of those answers feel right. Not really. Maybe it was something worse than a ghost. Maybe it was the sound of her own mind, unraveling in the silence of a house that had seen too much. And that's the one detail that's never been explained. The sound, the whisper, the scream, the silence that followed. Some say the walls still remember the hammer. Others say they remember the fear. You've heard the names, but have you ever wondered what they're whispering about now? There are those who believe the house is haunted by the spirit of the girl who died that day, or the ghost of the woman who made history. But not everyone agrees on who or what is still here. Some locals say the house is too full of secrets to be haunted by one soul. Maybe it's the echo of 100 stories, or the lingering voice of a community that still remembers the tragedy. And then there are the skeptics. They say the house is just old, and the wind, the creaks, the shadows, it all makes for a perfect story. But they're the ones who still come back, hoping to hear the whispers. You know, sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what you see, but what you feel missing. Like a shadow in the corner of your eye, or a name you can't quite place. Lizzie Borden's story is one of those half-remembered, half-forgotten, and always just out of reach. The case never truly closed, not in the way we think of justice. It was more like a question left hanging in the air, unanswered and unsolved, like a riddle whispered by the wind through the old house's broken windows. And here's the thing, Lizzie was never really accused. The trial was a spectacle, the verdict a verdict, but the truth, that's what's still missing. Like a puzzle with one piece left blank, waiting for someone to fill it in. So, what happened to Lizzie? Did she do it? Did she not? Or was she just a woman who lost everything, and the world never stopped asking the wrong questions? That's the mystery that still lingers in the walls. Not a ghost, but a question. And sometimes, the most haunting thing is the silence that follows it. You've heard the whispers, felt the chill of a century-old secret, and now you're left wondering if the house still watches. What do you think it wants? A confession? A memory? Or just a little piece of you? Sometimes, the most haunting silence is the one that follows a story. And sometimes, that silence isn't just empty, it's full of something you can't quite name. Before we move on, I want to ask you, what will you carry with you from tonight? A story? A fear? Or maybe, just a little more wonder? Thank you for walking with me through the shadows. I'll be right here, by the fire, when you're ready to hear the next story. You've heard of the Holocaust, of course. But have you ever wondered what happened to those who vanished from the heart of a city that once beat like a drum of war? The Warsaw Ghetto. It was more than a place, it was a prison of shadows and silence. This was no ordinary neighborhood. It was a walled city within a city, where the sound of footsteps could be heard above the cries of the desperate. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and desperation, and the silence between the sounds was louder than any scream. But the ghetto was more than just a place of suffering. It was a crucible of resistance, where stories were born in the darkest of hours. And now, decades later, those stories are still waiting to be told. Are you ready to listen? Let's walk through the silence together. Let's find out what happened to those who vanished from the ghetto. And let's remember that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit never truly fades. You know, the story of the Warsaw Ghetto isn't just about walls and bullets. It began with a decision, a moment of cold calculation. The Nazis, in their quest to control the East, decided to trap millions of Jews in a single, suffocating space. The ghetto was more than a place, it was a prison, a living tomb. Over 400,000 people were crammed into a space no bigger than a few city blocks, with barely enough room to breathe, let alone live. And then, the Nazis didn't just occupy the ghetto. They took control of every aspect of life, food, work, even death. They decided who would live and who would die, all under the guise of order and efficiency. But even in the darkest times, there was resistance. Some people fought back, others tried to survive, and a few, like the hidden ones, simply disappeared, their stories swallowed by history. And that's where our story begins, not in the chaos of war, but in the quiet, terrible silence of a place that once held so many lives, and now holds the ghosts of those who were never allowed to leave. You remember the first time you heard the word Holocaust? It was in a history class, and the teacher said it like it was just another name for a war. But you felt something in your chest, like a memory you didn't have. It wasn't until years later, when you read a book about the Warsaw Ghetto, that you realized the word wasn't just a label. It was a name for something that had been erased, like a dream you couldn't remember but still felt. You think about your own family, the stories they tell you about their ancestors, the places they grew up. You imagine them in the same streets, the same buildings, the same quiet, unassuming lives that were stolen by something far worse than war. And then, like a whisper in the dark, you start to wonder, what if the people who lived there never left? What if their names are still etched into the walls, waiting to be remembered? You've heard the stories of the ghetto, but what about the ones that were never told? The ones that vanished without a sound, swallowed by the silence of a world that forgot them. One morning, a group of women left their homes to collect water from a nearby well, only to never return. No footprints, no bodies, just the quiet absence of life in a place that had once hummed with it. Some say they were taken by the Nazis, others that they simply disappeared into the chaos, their fates lost in the fog of war. But the silence that followed was louder than any scream, and still, the air here holds the weight of their absence. A memory, a whisper, a name that was never spoken again. I remember the way the smoke clung to the air, thick and bitter, like the memory of something long gone. A man in a threadbare coat told me he saw a child's hand sticking out of the rubble just before the sky turned red. Another survivor, her voice trembling, described a woman in a blue dress who kept repeating, "Don't look back," as she walked toward the flames. She said it was like the woman was leading them to their end. One man swore he heard a child singing a lullaby in the ruins, a sound so clear it made his own heart ache. But when he turned, there was no one there, just the wind and the silence of a world that had forgotten them. These stories don't just haunt the past, they echo in the present. We remember them not to dwell, but to honor the ones who were lost in the shadows of history. The investigation started with a single name, a single address, and a single question: who was here and why were they never found? They dug through the city's archives, through old police reports and church records, and what they found was more than they expected: names, dates, and a pattern that felt like a ghost trying to speak. Then came the strange things, the whispers in empty rooms, the flicker of a shadow where no one stood, the feeling that someone was watching from behind a curtain. It wasn't just the past that haunted them, it was the silence, the absence, the way the city seemed to remember some names and forget others, as if it had its own kind of justice. And still, the investigation continued, not for closure, but for the truth, because sometimes the truth is the only thing that can make the silences stop. You know, the most haunting part of all this isn't the screams or the silence, it's the one thing that just isn't there. The one detail that has never been explained. Every document, every testimony, every whisper of memory points to that one moment, yet the truth about what happened there is as elusive as a ghost in the dark. It's not just the story that's missing, it's the person, the one who never got to tell their own. And that's why I keep coming back to this place, not for the fear, but for the silence that still speaks. Maybe the truth is out there, waiting for someone to ask the right question. You've heard the whispers in the alleys, the ones that say the ghetto isn't gone. Some say the walls still hum with old voices and the stones remember every name. What if the silence isn't just absence, but a kind of echo? There's a story passed down about a woman who walked through the ghetto on a moonless night, and when she reached the end, she saw a child waiting for her. She never told anyone, but sometimes the child is said to appear in the windows of old houses just before dawn. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Some say the ghetto isn't just a place, it's a presence. A memory that lingers in the air, like the scent of smoke and rain. It's not the ghosts that haunt us, but the truth they carry, buried beneath centuries of silence. And then there are those who say the ghetto never truly left. That every time you walk through a city, you're walking through the same streets, just as they were, and the people who died there are still waiting for someone to remember. You know, sometimes the worst crimes aren't the ones we see on the news. They're the ones that vanish like ghosts and leave only silence in their wake. The Warsaw Ghetto's victims, they were never counted. Their names were never spoken, just forgotten, like the walls that once held them. We still don't know how many died. We don't know who was buried in the rubble. And we don't know if they're still here waiting, watching, whispering their names into the dark. This is why we keep telling these stories. Not to scare you, but to remember, to honor, to never let them be forgotten again. And if you're listening, and you feel something, just know you're not alone. The past is still here, waiting for us to hear it. You know, sometimes the most haunting stories aren't the ones we hear, but the ones we feel in our bones. Like the silence that lingers after a name is forgotten. We gather stories to remember, but some memories refuse to be contained. They slip through our fingers like ash, leaving only a whisper in the dark. We tell these stories not to scare you, but to honor the ones who were never heard, the ones who still wait, somewhere in the dark. So let's light another candle and step into the next tale. But remember, some doors are never meant to be closed. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that slither through the stone like a breath of old ghosts. Strangeways is no ordinary prison, it's a place where the walls themselves seem to hold their breath. Built in the 1850s, Strangeways was designed to break men's spirits. But it's the women who have always been the ones to whisper about the cold spots and the sound of footsteps when no one's around. But what's most unsettling is that the whispers don't just come from the walls. They come from the air itself, like the breath of something that's been waiting a long time to be heard. It's not just the past that lingers here. Some claim the prison still feels the weight of his crimes, and the echoes of his secrets like a heartbeat you can't quite place, but you know is there. So, what do you think? Is it the walls, the history, or something else that's been waiting to be heard? You've heard the whispers. Now let's go deeper into the story. You know, the history of HMP Strangeways starts not with ghosts, but with a man named John Strangeways, who built this place in the 1840s. He was a wealthy landowner with a taste for the macabre, and he wanted a prison that would make even the most hardened criminals break down. The prison was meant to be a model of punishment and reform, but it was also built with a secret. A network of tunnels and cells that were supposed to keep prisoners contained, but some say they kept something else in. The first prisoners were kept in terrible conditions, damp, overcrowded, and with little to no light. Some say the cells were so cold, they left frost on the walls, and the silence was so thick, it felt like the walls were breathing. But the real mystery comes from the inmates who were never seen again. Some say they were hidden in the tunnels, others say they were used for something darker, and a few claim they were never prisoners at all, but something else entirely. And that's when the whispers began. Not from the inmates, but from the walls themselves. It's said they carry the voices of the ones who were never meant to be forgotten. You remember the way the air felt that first night, thick and heavy, like it was holding its breath. The walls seemed to hum, not with sound, but with something deeper, something you couldn't quite place. It wasn't the cold that woke you, but the silence. A silence so complete, it made you feel like you were the only one left in the world. And then, just as you were about to call out, you heard it, a whisper, so soft it could have been the wind. You told yourself it was just the building, that the old stone had always been a little loud. But the whispers grew louder, more frequent, and they started to make sense: names, voices, a language that wasn't quite English. It was as if the walls were speaking to you. And then, one morning, you found the door to your cell ajar, the key in the lock. The key you never took. The key you never had. The key that had been there all along. You tried to laugh it off, to tell yourself it was all in your head, but the walls had already begun their work. They had started to whisper your name, and you could feel them listening back. You know, the real horror isn't the ghosts, it's what happened to the man who vanished in the night. They say he was last seen in the East Wing, but his footprints led nowhere. You ever think about how a man could disappear without a sound? The guards found his wallet, but not his body, just a single, bloodied handprint on the wall, like he tried to claw his way out of the walls. You ever feel like you're being watched, even when you're alone? They never found the body, but the cell door was locked from the inside. And the walls, oh, the walls still whisper, especially when the wind is just right. You ever notice how silence can be louder than screams? The man was a quiet soul, a prisoner with a clean record. But something in that cell, something in those walls took him. And now, every night, the walls still speak his name. You ever wonder if they're trying to tell us something? The truth is still buried in those stones. And the whispers? They're still waiting for someone to listen. You ever feel like you're being watched, even when you're alone? I've spoken to several locals who swear the walls of Strangeways still remember the voices of the prisoners who once roamed them. Some say they hear whispers in the old stone corridors, like echoes of the past trying to break free. One man told me he used to visit the prison as a boy, and he claims the walls would hum in the dead of night, especially when the wind was howling through the arches. The most unsettling account came from a woman who said she heard a voice calling her name from the prison's basement. She didn't go down, but the sound followed her home, and she never forgot it. These stories aren't just tall tales, they've been passed down for generations, and even the local historians can't explain them. You've heard the whispers, now can you hear them? The investigation started with a simple request to look into the strange sounds coming from the old cells. We asked ourselves, what if the walls were just trying to tell us something? We combed through decades of prison records, looking for patterns, and what we found was unsettling. Over a dozen inmates reported hearing whispers in their cells, often just before their deaths. One old guard remembered a man who never spoke, just listened. He said the walls would sometimes hum like a low, mournful song, and the sound would change when someone died. We found no evidence of a physical cause, no break-ins, no natural explanations. What if the prison itself was holding something back, something it wasn't meant to let out? It's easy to dismiss it as superstition, but the more we listened, the more we realized some places don't forget, and some voices, they just won't stop speaking. You see it now, don't you? That one thing that just won't go away. The one detail that has never been explained. They say it was a prison, a place of punishment, but something about it feels more like a tomb. A place where time stands still and the past won't let go. And that whisper, it's not just a sound, it's a question. A boy, a reminder that some secrets refuse to stay buried, no matter how deep the earth or how long the years. So why do we keep coming back to this place? Why do we hear it still? Maybe it's not just the walls that are whispering, it's the silence that answers. Some say the walls of Strangeways whisper in the night, not in words, but in the way the wind moves through the old stones. Have you ever heard a house breathe? It's a sound that lingers, like a sigh from the past. Local old-timers claim the prisoners used to mark their cells with scratches and symbols, and now the walls seem to echo with their ghosts. Do you think they're still there, trapped in those cold stone cells? Some say the prison still hums with the energy of the past, a kind of haunting that's not just in the buildings, but in the land itself. Do you think the earth remembers what it's buried? And then there are the stories of the men who vanished, their names never spoken, their fates unknown. The walls don't just remember, they wait. Have you ever felt watched, even when you're alone? You know, sometimes the most haunting stories aren't about what happened, but what never did. And in strange ways, the silence has become a language of its own. The prison was built to break men, but maybe it was the walls that broke them first. They say the voices start at midnight, but no one's ever seen them. Every year, the same question lingers in the air. What if the men never left? What if the walls still hold them, and they're not the only ones who have ever been trapped here? Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And so, we wait. For a sign. For a truth. For the walls to finally speak. But maybe they never will. And maybe that's the real curse of Strangeways. You've heard the whispers of Strangeways, felt the chill of its walls, but have you ever wondered what lingers in the silence between the stories? Sometimes the scariest things are the ones we never hear at all. Perhaps the walls don't just remember the past, they guard it. And maybe, just maybe, they're waiting for someone to ask the right question in the right way. So, as we turn the page to a new tale, let's not forget some stories don't end. They just wait, like a ghost in the attic, for the right moment to whisper again. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go check on the tea. But don't worry, I'll be right back. And if you hear anything, well, I hope you remember to turn on the lights. You've heard of the Warsaw Uprising, but what about the silence that followed? Imagine a city that once burned, now quiet, with only the wind whispering through broken streets. In the heart of that silence, there's a place where the echoes of the past refuse to fade. A narrow alleyway, barely wide enough for one person to pass, leads to a forgotten corner of history. Some say you can still hear the voices of those who were never meant to be forgotten. The air feels heavier here, as though the city itself is holding its breath. This is where the story begins, where the forgotten victims of the Warsaw Ghetto still wait, their voices lingering like smoke in the air, their pain etched into the very stones. You know, the story of the Warsaw Ghetto isn't just about bombs and walls. It started with a promise. Germany promised the Jews of Warsaw they'd be safe, protected, even given a special status in their own city. But behind that promise was a lie. The Nazis wanted to control the Jewish population, to strip them of their rights, their homes, and their dignity, all while pretending to offer them security. The Nazis didn't just build walls. They built a system: roundups, forced labor, and the slow, methodical stripping of every piece of human dignity. It was a carefully planned machine of dehumanization. But even in the darkest hours, there was resistance. The ghetto was not just a place of suffering, it was a place of courage, of quiet defiance, of people who refused to be erased. The story of the Warsaw Ghetto is not just about what happened. It's about who was there, who fought back, and who was left behind to face the worst of human cruelty. You remember how the air in Warsaw used to smell like fresh bread and blooming lilacs? Well, one day it turned sharp, like burnt sugar, and the sky turned a sickly gray. It was as if the very ground had been salted with sorrow. The first whispers came from the women in the market, their voices hushed like they were speaking to a ghost. They said the children were not coming home, and the bread was too heavy for their hands. Then came the stories of mothers who never returned from the market, of fathers who vanished in the night, of babies who cried and cried until their voices were gone. You might have told yourself it was just the war, just the hunger, just the fear. But deep down, you knew it wasn't just the war. You knew something had changed in the air, in the silence, in the way the world looked at you. And so you began to listen, not just to the stories, but to the silence between them. Because sometimes, the loudest voices are the ones that don't speak at all. You followed the echoes of the Warsaw Ghetto through its alleyways, through its whispers. Now you're standing at the edge of a sunken street. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and something older, something that lingers in the bones of the city. In the spring of 1943, the Nazis sealed the ghetto like a tomb, and the screams of the trapped were drowned out by the silence of the earth. But the earth remembers. It holds the weight of the dead and the weight of those who never made it out. There were no survivors in that final push. The resistance fighters, the children, the mothers, the fathers, they were all swallowed by the concrete and the silence. And still, the city waits for them to return. Sometimes, the wind carries the sound of a child's laughter or a mother's lullaby. Sometimes, it carries nothing at all, but the city knows their names. It remembers their faces, and it waits for them to speak. I remember their eyes wide, unblinking, like they were trying to remember something they'd lost long ago. A survivor, a child, a mother, none of them could tell me what they saw. One man said he saw a shadow move where no one should be. Not a man, not a woman, but something else, something that wasn't of this world. They spoke in hushed tones, as if the air itself would carry their words to the wrong ears. Some said the dead were still trying to find their way home. Others said the voices came at night, whispering names, calling for help, and no one could tell if they were pleading or warning. There's a truth in those accounts, something that lingers in the silence between the words, like the ghost of a memory that won't fade. We followed the trail of whispers to a forgotten archive, where yellowed pages whispered secrets of the past. The air was thick with dust and the scent of old paper, like a ghost trying to hold on. Each page told a different story, some with names, others just initials. One entry mentioned a child, no more than 8, whose name had been scratched out in a hurry. It felt like someone had tried to erase a memory they couldn't bear. One document, in a different hand, spoke of a woman who had tried to save her child. The words were frantic, almost pleading. It made us wonder, had she made it? Had the child? Or had they both been lost in the chaos? The deeper we dug, the more we saw the truth. These weren't just victims of history. They were real people, and their stories were waiting to be remembered. Even now, in the silence, they were still here. You know, there's one thing about the Warsaw Ghetto that still haunts me. No one can explain why the walls were built so low, just a few feet high, like they were meant to keep people in, not out. It's like the city itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to ask the question that's never been answered. Why build such a thing? What was the point of it all? You ever think about that? How something so massive could just disappear, like the walls were never there at all. Just a memory, a myth, a warning. It's not just the walls, it's the silence. The silence that lingers like a ghost in the air, waiting for someone to finally ask why they were built so low. And that's the one thing that's never been explained, not by history, not by the survivors. Just silence. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of truth that's still waiting to be found. You've heard the names, but some stories are passed down like heirlooms, whispered in backrooms, over cups of tea, and in the hush of a quiet night. Some say the ghosts of the Warsaw Ghetto still gather in the old alleys, waiting for someone to listen. There are those who believe the echoes of the uprising still linger in the air, like the sound of a child's laughter, or a door slamming shut when no one's there. Some say it's the spirits of the murdered, still searching for closure. Some locals swear the air smells different near the ghetto, like burnt sugar and old paper. They say it's the scent of 1,000 stories, waiting to be told. Some say it's the ghost of a mother's perfume, lingering on the wind. And then there are the ones who say the ghetto doesn't just remember, it watches that the walls are still alive, and that if you walk through the right door at the right time, you might just hear a voice calling your name. You know, sometimes the hardest part of a story isn't the ghost, or the tragedy, or even the silence. It's the fact that no one ever asked the right questions. We've spent decades trying to piece together what happened in the Warsaw Ghetto, but the voices of those who were silenced remain trapped in the rubble. There are so many stories left to be told, so many names we've never been able to find. And maybe that's the real horror of it all. We can't rewrite history, but we can remember. We can keep asking questions, even when the answers are buried too deep to reach. And if you're listening, maybe you've got a story to share. Maybe you found something, or maybe you've never stopped looking. You know, sometimes the most powerful ghosts aren't the ones who shout, but the ones who whisper their names into the wind, like the ones who never got to say goodbye. And when we leave these stories behind, we should never forget that the silence between the lines is where the truth often hides. After all, the stories we tell aren't just about the ghosts. They're about the people who lived, loved, and were lost. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I hear the wind carrying a name I recognize. Shall we find out who it is? You ever heard of a place where the past refuses to stay buried? The Priory of Sion, nestled in the misty hills of France, has been whispered about for centuries. Some say it's a sanctuary, others a tomb for secrets. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Built in the 12th century, it was once a refuge for scholars and mystics. But something changed. The monks vanished, the manuscripts disappeared, and the air turned thick with something unspoken. Visitors report hearing whispers in the wind, the echo of footsteps on empty stone floors, and the faint smell of burning incense, though no one can find the source. Legends say the priory is cursed, guarded by spirits who punish those who seek its secrets. But what exactly was hidden here? And why does it still feel like the past is watching? You ever wondered what it feels like to be watched by something that's been waiting for centuries? That's what the Priory of Sion offers: silence, shadows, and a story that's only just beginning. You ever wonder how a place becomes cursed? Well, the Priory of Sion started as a quiet, scholarly gathering of knights and scholars in the early 12th century. They called themselves the Order of the Sun, and their mission was to protect knowledge and lighten a world that feared both. But the order wasn't just about books. They had a secret. They were protectors of a sacred text, the Asterisk Codex of Solomon Asterisk, said to hold the key to the divine. They believed it was hidden in the very stones of the earth, guarded by the blood of their ancestors. The priory was more than a house, it was a sanctuary, a fortress of thought, and a refuge from the wars that raged across the land. But even the brightest light can cast a long shadow, and the order's legacy would be twisted by time and betrayal. Some say they were wiped out by a jealous king. Others whisper that the last of them vanished into the woods, leaving only their books, their secrets, and a curse that would follow them through the ages. And so, the Priory of Sion became more than a place, it became a legend, a warning, and a ghost in the silence of the old world. But its story isn't over yet, not by a long shot. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. A flicker in the corner of your eye, a creak in the old floorboards, the way the wind seemed to hold its breath just before the lights went out. It started with the dreams, visions of cloaked figures and whispering voices, as if the house itself was trying to tell you something it wasn't meant to. You tried to laugh it off, to tell yourself it was just the house playing tricks, but the unease never left. It was like the walls were watching, waiting for you to finally listen. And then, one night, you heard it, a whisper, not from the walls, but from inside your own mind, as if the past was trying to reach through the present. That's when you knew something was terribly wrong, and it had been waiting for you all along. You remember the letter, don't you? That final, hurried note left behind in the library, its ink smudged by the trembling hand of a woman who knew she was running out of time. It spoke of a secret hidden in the stone, a truth buried with the last of the Priory's bloodline. The words were hurried, desperate, and filled with the weight of a lifetime of silence. Some say she was taken by the Priory's curse, others believed she fled to protect a truth too dangerous to be spoken. But none can say for sure what became of her, and so the mystery remains, like the scent of old parchment in the air, lingering just out of reach, waiting to be uncovered. I've spoken to dozens of people who claim to have seen the Priory's ghost. Some say it's a woman in a 16th century gown. Others say it's a shadowy figure with hollow eyes. One man swore he saw her standing at the gate, weeping into her hands. A retired librarian told me she once heard a child's laughter echoing through the halls at night, so faint it almost sounded like a trick of the mind. But when she followed the sound, she found a door that wasn't there before. One witness described a cold wind that would suddenly blow through the priory, even on the warmest summer days. It's said to carry with it the scent of lavender and something else, something that smells like loss. And then there's the man who claimed to hear a voice calling his name in the dead of night. He said it was his own voice, but it was asking for help. He never told me what he did next, but he looked at me like he'd seen the end of the world. These stories don't just linger in the air, they cling to you, like the scent of old parchment or the memory of a long-forgotten lullaby. You think you're listening to tales, but sometimes you're not sure if you're hearing the past or the future. We followed the whispers of the past into the heart of the Priory's ruins, where time seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and something older, something that clung to the skin like a forgotten memory. The first clue was a small, weathered journal found in a hidden alcove, its pages yellowed and brittle, filled with cryptic symbols and a single word repeated over and over: remember. As we delved deeper, we found a sealed room beneath the floorboards, its entrance marked by a strange sigil that matched the symbols in the journal. Inside, the air was colder than the rest of the ruins, and the silence was absolute. One of the researchers, a woman with a quiet strength and a sharp mind, insisted on entering. She said she felt the presence of someone watching, waiting, and that the walls themselves seemed to hum with a voice she could not understand. And then, just as she stepped inside, the light flickered briefly, but unmistakably, and the room behind her seemed to shift, as if it had never been there at all. You know, sometimes the most haunting thing about a story isn't the ghost, or the curse, or the tragedy, it's the one detail that just doesn't add up. The thing no one can explain. The thing that feels like it's been left behind, like a shadow in the corner of your mind. The Priory of Sion's secret was never the blood, or the betrayal, or the centuries of whispers. It was the missing name, the one name that was never written down, never spoken aloud, and never passed down, just lost. And here's the thing, no one knows if it was erased, or if it was never there to begin with, if the name was never real, or if it was real and just forgotten. But that's the real curse, isn't it? The one thing that was never explained. So next time you hear a story about the Priory of Sion, remember this: the true mystery isn't in the past, it's in the silence, in the gap, in the one thing that was never said. And that, my friends, is what haunts us still. You know, some folks say the real curse isn't the ghosts, but the stories themselves. These tales have been passed down like heirlooms, and they've shaped the town's very bones. There's a theory that the priory's curse is tied to the land itself, that the soil remembers the blood and the sorrow. Some say you can still hear the earth weeping if you listen closely. Some say the townsfolk still hold a secret ritual at the solstice, honoring the dead and the living. They light a candle, say a name, and let the smoke carry it away, like a prayer or a warning. And then there are the ones who say the priory isn't cursed at all, just forgotten. That the true horror is not the ghosts, but the silence that follows them. So, what do you think? Is the priory's legacy a warning, a mystery, or just a story that refuses to let go? You know, sometimes the most haunting things are the ones that never quite end. The Priory of Sion still whispers its secrets in the wind, and no one has ever really solved what happened there. The last known visitor to the Priory was a young woman named Clara, who claimed she saw a ghostly figure standing at the altar. She never returned, and her journal was found open, pages filled with frantic scribbles. No one has been able to find Clara's body, and the police say it was never a crime. But if you listen closely, the wind still carries the sound of her voice, echoing through the stone corridors. Perhaps the truth is buried beneath the stones, waiting for someone brave enough to dig. But I wonder, what would you do if you found a journal that changed everything you thought you knew? And so the Priory remains, a silent sentinel of the past, guarding its secrets like a mother who never lets go, until someone comes looking for answers and finds more questions. You followed the story through mist and memory, through whispers in the dark and the weight of history. It's easy to lose yourself in the past, but sometimes the past finds you. The Priory's secrets may be buried, but they're not gone. They linger in the air, in the silence between the stones, waiting for someone to listen. And as you leave this tale, remember that the most haunting stories are those that refuse to end. They live on in the stories we tell, the places we visit, and the questions we never fully answer. So before we move on, take a moment to think, what legacy do you leave behind? What story will others whisper about you long after you've gone? Stay with us, dear listeners, for the next tale is already waiting, and it's not the last one. You've heard of prisons with ghosts, but have you ever heard of one that whispers to you? This place, HMP Strangeways, is a fortress of stone and secrets nestled in the quiet heart of Devon. It's not the kind of place you'd want to be locked in, but it's the kind of place that seems to remember you. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dub 5th smart speaker. There's a link in a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Built in the 19th century, Strangeways was designed to break the will of the prisoner. But what it seems to do now is break the silence. The walls, thick and unyielding, are said to carry the voices of those who once called this place home, echoes that never fade. Now, I know what you're thinking, why would a prison be haunted? Well, the answer is simple. It was built on the bones of a medieval fortress, and the souls of those who died in its walls have never left. Some say they whisper warnings to the living, others say they're just the ghosts of those who never made it out. And then there are the stories, the ones that make your skin crawl. A guard who swore he heard a child's laughter echoing through the halls. A prisoner who claimed he saw a shadow move in his cell, only to find it was the ghost of a man who died decades before. These are not just rumors, they're the kind of whispers that make you wonder if the walls are alive. So, as we begin our journey through the history and mystery of HMP Strangeways, I want you to imagine yourself standing in that cold, damp corridor, the air thick with silence and the feeling that you're not alone. You know, the first time this place was built, it wasn't called Strangeways at all. It was a fortress, a place where the crown held its prisoners close, and the walls were built with stone and silence. The original structure dates back to the 13th century, when the Normans decided to build a jail that could hold even the most dangerous of men. It was a place of punishment, not just for the body, but for the spirit. By the 18th century, the prison had grown, the cells were built deeper underground, and the walls began to echo with the sounds of suffering. They called it the Borg, a name that still lingers in the whispers. And then, in 1840, the prison was renamed Strangeways, after a local magistrate who had a soft spot for the poor until they got too poor. The name stuck, but the history didn't. So, you see, the walls here were built with stone and silence. But over time, they've come to be built with stories, some true, some just whispered in the dark. You remember how the air felt that first night, thick with a scent of damp stone and something else, something old, like the walls themselves were breathing. It was subtle, but you noticed it. Then came the whispers, not loud, not clear, but just enough to make your skin prickle. You turned your head, but there was no one there, and the sound was still there. You tried to brush it off as your imagination, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They weren't just sounds, they were words, half-formed, like they were trying to tell you something. And then, one night, you heard your own name. Not spoken, not shouted, it was just there, in the air, like it had always been. And you knew, with a certainty that chilled you, that you weren't alone. You didn't say a word. You just stood there, listening, and realized that the walls were no longer just walls. They were watching. They were waiting. You've heard the whispers, but have you ever wondered what happened to the man who vanished in the night? The last known sighting of him was outside the prison gate, staring at the walls like they were alive. He was a prisoner, a man of quiet strength, but something about that night changed everything. The guards said he was never seen again, not even in the cell block. Just gone. They found his belongings days later, still in his cell, untouched. No struggle, no sign of a fight. Just his belongings, and the faintest echo of a voice that wasn't his murmuring from the wall. The guards called it a trick of the wind, but the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, until even the most skeptical among them began to wonder if something had taken him, or if he'd taken something from the walls. To this day, the prison still hears him. They say the walls remember, and that if you listen closely enough, you can still hear his voice, calling from the silence between the stones. I've spoken with several people who claim to have heard the whispers in strange ways. One man, a retired prisoner, said the voices followed him home like a shadow he couldn't shake. Another woman, a former guard, swore the walls sang at night, a low, mournful hum that made her skin crawl. She said it was like the prison itself was remembering. A local historian told me that in the 1960s, a group of teenagers claimed to hear the voices of the dead during a midnight walk. They said it was like the walls were trying to tell them something. Even a local baker, who's lived near strange ways for decades, said he's heard the whispers in the early hours. He said they sound like the ghosts of the men who once called this place home. These are just stories. They're echoes, fragments of something deeper. And if you listen closely, you might hear them too. The investigation began with a simple question. What if the walls had memory? We walked through the cells, the corridors, to damp stone, and felt the weight of decades in every breath. They found old records, letters, complaints, even a few whispered testimonies. But nothing prepared us for what lay beneath the floorboards, half buried in dust and time. One of the guards, a retired man with a story for every season, told us about the whispers in the walls. He said they came at night, not in words, but in a sound like someone breathing, just outside the cell. They found a hidden chamber behind the warden's office, sealed off for decades. Inside, they found a locked room with a single, blood-stained handprint on the door and a name no one could remember. The investigation didn't end in answers, but in more questions. And sometimes, the walls don't whisper, they just wait. You know, the real mystery isn't the ghosts, it's the one thing that's never been explained. They say the walls whisper in a language only the prisoners could understand. No one knows what the whispers were about. Some say it was a code, others say it was a warning, but the prison was closed long before anyone even thought to ask. The prison was shut down in the 70s, but the whispers didn't stop. They say the walls still remember, and the last prisoner to leave never spoke of what they heard. No one has ever figured out what the whispers were, and no one will, unless someone dares to listen again. But I don't think the walls are ready to let that happen. Some say the walls here are not just stone and brick, but a living memory of the men who once walked these halls. They whisper in the wind, in the rain, in the silence between the echoes of the past. Others believe the whispers come from the souls of the prisoners who never left. They say they can still hear the voices of those who were never meant to be forgotten. The locals still gather on quiet evenings, sharing stories passed down through generations. They don't know why they tell them, but they do, as if the truth is waiting to be uncovered. And then there are the ones who say the prison is never truly empty, that there's always someone listening, someone waiting for the next story to be told, the next whisper to be heard. And so, we come to the end of the road, but not the end of the story. The walls of strange ways still hold their breath, waiting for someone to listen. There are no more bodies to find, no more voices to hear, but the mystery remains, like a candle burning in the dark, flickering, uncertain. They say the walls don't just whisper, they remember, and sometimes they whisper to those who are brave enough to stay a little longer. So, dear listener, if you ever find yourself standing in the shadow of a forgotten place, remember, some stories are never finished. They just wait for the right ear. And if you hear something, well, you know where to find me. You can't help but wonder as you leave the prison grounds if the walls are still listening. Did they ever really stop whispering? Some say the echoes of the past linger in places like this, where time doesn't quite move forward, but rather it holds its breath. And as you turn a final corner, the silence is so thick, you almost forget to breathe. The prison is gone, but the stories remain. And sometimes, the stories are the only thing left to remember. So, as you walk away, you carry the whisper with you just a little bit. You've heard the whispers of a place where the walls don't just echo, they wail. HMP Strangeways, that old, crumbling prison in the heart of the UK, has a reputation that's as thick as the stone it's built from. It's not just the cold, damp air that makes your skin crawl, it's the sound that haunts the very stones. A wail, a cry, a voice that seems to rise from the walls themselves, echoing through the empty halls. You know, the walls of Strangeways didn't start wailing because of a ghost. No, they started because of a man named William Joyce, a prison governor with a heart as cold as the cell blocks he oversaw. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now and in the description below. Alright, back to it. He was determined to make Strangeways the most feared prison in England, and he had a plan: torture, isolation, and a system that would break even the strongest wills. But some say he got more than he bargained for. There are stories that the walls began to cry out in the night, not from the prisoners, but from the very stones themselves. Some say the sound was a warning. Others say it was the prison itself, resisting its own destruction. But the real mystery isn't the wails, it's the silence that followed. After Joyce died, the wailing stopped, and no one ever found the body. Just a note left on his desk, written in his own hand, "I hear them." So, dear listener, what do you think? Was it the prison that cried, or the man who built it? Or was it something else entirely? Something that waited in the walls, ready to whisper again? Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end.